Chapter 856. Under the Strong Light, by Sinyen and Kitano Sweto squinted their eyes. The cloudy void in front of them had turned into a giant steamer. Everything was blurred and distorted in the steam, including the pass in front of them. However, the pass area was somewhat out of place with the overall environment. It had a certain degree of resistance, so when the falling sun wheel smashed down, there was a slight deflection. Distortion against distortion. Time and space were stagnant for a while. The momentum of the impact slowed down, and the scene in front of them became more and more blurry. Illusion? Real world? Kitano Sweto was a typical physical type of person. As long as any supernatural situation did not really affect him, he would be suspicious. He still did not hear by Sinyen's answer. As for the Pope, the moment Kitano Sweto's mind hooked with the madam, he suddenly felt dizzy. His feet seemed to have lost their support, and he felt a strong sense of falling. As a physical type of person, maintaining balance was a natural ability. Kitano Sweto subconsciously exerted strength in his waist and abdomen, but the feedback from his body told him that he was still standing there, very straight and stable. What was really out of balance and falling was his soul. A blinding light shone in. This time, it was hard to tell whether it was from the real world or the spiritual stimulation. It intertwined with the shadow structure of the tree nest, forming a sacrificial furnace that ignited all the soul power involved. At this moment, the tree nest structure extracted the soul power of Kitano Sweto and the others, and used it for other purposes. It was most likely to coordinate with the attack of the falling sun wheel. This was not surprising at all. Kitano Sweto was not a fledgling. The Pope used the tree nest to include all of them in the spiritual structure, so there must be a deeper consideration. Compared to the usual actions of the Amaterasu cult, what they did today was considered a relatively peaceful one. After all, he was a level B physical type. Although his soul power was not his forte, his foundation was solid, and he was full of vitality. This wave of absorption would not cause serious damage. At the moment, he was only short of breath and dizzy, but his mind was still clear. While he was checking his own condition, the violent vibration transmitted from the void in front of him ran over the tempered glass of the viewing platform and pressed on his chest. The vibration was transmitted from his chest to his brain, so much so that his lips and teeth were numb. He instinctively raised his head, but his vision was dark. It had nothing to do with the blood supply to the head. Instead, in the distant burning cloud, the falling sun happened to have an extremely obvious contraction, and its light was clearly dimming. As the light and darkness changed, the distortion of the void increased dramatically. Kitano Sugito could no longer see anything with his naked eyes. All he could see was the accumulation of complex colors. However, between the real thing and the illusion, there was a vague network that extended in the vast space. Kitano Satoto captured the most intuitive outline. It was like a towering tree, with branches on top and roots on the bottom. Half of it was visible, and the other half penetrated into the endless void. It also directly interfered with the structure of time and space. The sun wheel that ruled over the changes in brightness and darkness in the sky was also inextricably linked to the outline of the veins. Great divine treasure of the Fusang divine tree. Any ability user in Ban City could guess this answer based on their instincts. But what was special about Hoshino Sugito was that his spirit and perception could follow the veins of the roots in the void and explore into a level that was unimaginable in the past, allowing him to see the most intuitive details. Am I also talented in the structure of time and space? As the absurd thought popped up in his head, Hoshino Sugito also saw the brilliant sun wheel held up by the branches of the giant tree, like a tomahawk in the hands of a giant god. After the first attack failed, it slightly retracted and then smashed down again. Crack. The pure explosion on the spiritual level crushed Hoshino Satoto's mind. His mind was tightly bound to the extraordinary image of the sun wheel and the giant tree. When it collided with the pass in the clouds, he felt most of the details inside and also had to bear the surging impact from every detail. With a muffled groan, Hoshino Satoto's brain felt like it was forcibly split open and filled with hot magma. The pain was far greater than the damage from having his soul power sucked away. Even with his strong physique, he couldn't resist it. He staggered back a few steps until he hit the door frame at the entrance of the observation deck. His legs were so weak that he couldn't support his body, and he slowly fell to the ground. The self-protection mechanism was finally activated. The sun wheel and the giant tree all turned into meaningless smoke. Even the corresponding memories were blurred. He just followed the inertia in front of him. He opened his eyes wide and watched the distortion around the pass in the clouds, pushed to the extreme, and the abnormal contraction of the sun wheel also pressed to the extreme. When things reached an extreme, they would move in the opposite direction. In just 1,000th of a second, an unprecedented strong light burst out. Hoshino Satoto closed his eyes, but the strong light still penetrated his eyelids and reflected a translucent blood-red color. 2 seconds later, the strong light faded and Hoshino Satoto dared to open his eyes. Even after the most dazzling wave of light had passed, half of the sky was still as bright as day. The dark night had been torn to pieces and there was almost no trace of it. He saw that under the bombardment of the sun wheel, most of the structure of the pass built next to the clouds had evaporated. There was a large hole in the center with a radius of at least 1 kilometer. In this void environment, the thick clouds that were like towering mountains had become irregular piles that connected the front and the back. Even the other areas that didn't bear the impact of the sun wheel were already riddled with holes. It seemed that if there was another strong wind, it would vanish into thin air. The intercontinental airship moved forward under the bright light. There was almost no cumulonimbus around it. It was like a normal flight. This is really, Hoshino Satoto was confused. Everything that had just happened was beyond his cognitive limit. The self-protection mechanism was still working. All he knew was that the situation had suddenly been pushed to the most intense level. In the blink of an eye, there were only ruins left. At this time, he saw Bai Xinyan, who was still standing in front of him. The most intense scene had passed. Everyone was finally able to focus on something that they had neglected before. This mysterious woman stood perfectly straight from the waist down, but her upper body was leaning forward. She stretched out her arms against the tempered glass wall. Her body trembled as she breathed. It was clear that the other side wasn't having a good time either. Hoshino Satoto opened his mouth, wanting to ask a few questions, but the smell of fresh blood rushed up his throat. His mouth and nose were already wet. The relatively weak capillary network had nearly burst clean. He choked and coughed. Blood sprayed everywhere. He was in a sorry state. Bai Xinyan must have heard the cough. She exerted some strength in her arms and turned around to look. Her expression was calm, but her face was pale to the point of being transparent. Hoshino Satoto coughed out the blood clot in his throat with great difficulty. He asked in a hoarse voice, "Is he dead?" He was obviously referring to Ronan. Bai Xinyan curled her lips. "I'm not sure, he isn't." The Pope's telepathic thoughts had been absent for a long time. They reappeared and reverberated within the tree nest. But his words confirmed that the structure of the mental plane had already lost its stability. The telepathic transmission was illusory and illusory. There seemed to be a dark flame burning in the corner, creating disturbances from time to time. The Pope, however, had no intention of mending the situation. He described in detail what was happening at the moment in a rare instance. "We have broken the framework that he had erected, and broken the rules that he had forcefully inserted, but there is still a certain distance between us and his existence." Distance? Maybe it's only a centimeter. Maybe it's 1,000 kilometers. Maybe it's in another space and time. You mean, there is no point in delving into this? Look, the fortification is being restored. In fact, we are shuttling through its huge and precise construction site. Every water molecule we have come into contact with could be the building material for the next construction. Even though Hoshino Satoto's spirit was extremely dispirited, he still subconsciously turned his gaze to look through the viewing platform. He looked at the gradually darkening sky and the scattered clouds. In fact, he couldn't see anything special about it. It was probably because of his first impression. He felt that the flying cotton-like objects around the airship were suffused with a faint spiritual light. There were faintly discernible trajectories that interweaved to form the outline of a grand building. At this time, Bai Xinyan asked, "What do we do next?" "We don't do anything. That attack just now practically mobilized all the power that can be mobilized at this distance. Since we weren't able to make the final decision, we won't be able to do anything to him for a while." Bai Xinyan and Hoshino Sutoto didn't know how to respond. If the Pope's words were to spread, Luo Nan's evaluation in the inner world would probably soar by several levels. Oh, it seemed like there was no one who could rise by several levels. After a few seconds, Bai Xinyan said, "Your Majesty exerted force just to reach this conclusion?" It sounded like sarcasm at first, but in reality, it was very formal. The Pope's response was very calm. "I just feel that there is no need to hold an educational competition. Young people are so pure. They are researching this battle on the spot. They have probably forgotten their original goal. Do they want to be high profile? Or do they want to be low-key? What's important is that Shinju has been led into a rhythm by him. She has forgotten today's goal. Fortunately, I still remember. Your Majesty's goal is to find that interferer of Ban City? You suspect that it is Luo Nan?" Bai Xinyan's telepathic thoughts suddenly became straightforward. The Pope took advantage of the situation to continue, "Look, the situation has become clear. Today, we have at least verified that he has this ability. Don't say doubt. That will only make people more confused." Confused? His ability exceeds expectations, but his critical performance deviates. He can't see through the inside. Of course he will be confused. Oh, so he encountered a confusing choice when doing a multiple-choice question? The Pope's telepathic thought seemed to be laughing. "Child, reality has never been a question. Only a young man with a straight and narrow eye would need to be matched one by one, to be flawless. Right now, I just need to know that he is a fellow that needs to be taken seriously." The telepathic thoughts continued, but the structure of the tree nest could no longer support itself. It suddenly collapsed and turned into nothingness. Chapter 857. The tree nest on the spiritual plane collapsed, and the participants who were passively trapped in it returned to the real world. The natural curtain of night descended once again, like a thick blanket, blocking the field of vision, giving people a sense of self-deception and peace of mind. The Pope, who was in charge of the situation, left. The observation deck remained silent. Kitano Sukito and Bai Xinyan had their own thoughts, until the swarm of signals and communication devices connected, filling the space with ringing and vibrations. Kitano Sukito coughed again and raised his wrist. There was a list of communication requests from the Tamagawa family and their surrounding social circles. However, in the past half an hour, the first-class cabin had been an isolated island of information. There was almost no communication going in or out. On the other hand, the other areas of the airship maintained contact with the outside world. So this was not a signal interruption, but it was 100 times more terrifying. Because this was due to some kind of tacit understanding, and also due to some kind of silent majesty. The source was naturally the Amaterasu cult. There was no more obvious fact than this. The Amaterasu cult was the master of Osaka City, the undisputed ruler of traditional political and military forces like the Tamkawa family. Looking at the source, it was only 20 to 30 years ago. At Kitano Sukito's age, he had witnessed the entire process of the rise of the Amaterasu cult. This was the power and effect of a transcendent. If that was the case, the other side should be very fast. Kitano Sukito suddenly shivered. After stirring up a scene that was almost out of control, the Pope patted his butt and left. The true God probably wouldn't stay either, but the other side of the conflict was clearly still here. At this time, the intercontinental airship had completely passed through the ruins of the cumulonimbus cloud cluster. It was said that the cloud pass was still being rebuilt, and it had been completely left behind. But what was the point of such a small distance for a transcendent of that level? Thinking of this, Kitano Sukito did not have the mood to respond to the swarm of communication requests. His muscles tensed up, and he struggled to stand up from the ground. He wanted to respond effectively, but he was at a loss. Don't worry, under the mask of rationality, Professor Luo is not the kind of person to vent his anger on others. Speaking of which, we are also victims. Although he agreed with this self-assessment, was it really okay to say it so bluntly? Bai Xinyan's breathless voice didn't comfort him at all. Instead, it made him feel even more uneasy. Right now, he even felt that there was a piercingly cold will being injected into every single water molecule around him. It seemed that the next step would be to penetrate into his flesh and bones, see through everything, and sketch out life and death. Professor Luo could definitely do it. Subconsciously, Kitano Sukido put a hand on his chest, hoping to stabilize his abnormal heartbeat. At the same time, a faint light appeared before his eyes. It was Bai Xinyan opening the virtual workspace. What was shown in the work area was work. TSK, such a thing has just happened, and yet, you're forcing me to sign it without any consolation. How cold-blooded and foolish. It turns out that I'm surrounded by a nest of giant lizards with only their cruel nature left. What? Actually, Kitano Sukido wasn't sure if Bai Xinyan was talking to him, but it felt better to chat at this time. While Bai Xinyan was operating in the virtual workspace, she refuted, "It's already like this, and you still want to stir up trouble in Osaka?" "Of course, I refuse." Kitano Sukido opened his mouth. He felt like he was watching a stage play. Bai Xinyan's expression and actions were on point, but there was a strong sense of deliberate intent, as if she was purposely putting on a show for someone to see. It was really a satirical play that made people unable to laugh. At this time, Bai Xinyan had finished her work. She turned around and kindly continued to comfort him. "Mr. Kitano, it's almost over. Look at the two of us. One is a bodyguard, and the other is a kept woman. We both have masters to serve, and from time to time, we have to expand our service scope. Our lives are already so hard, why do we have to think about things outside of our duties? What if King's sugar daddy?" Finally, Kitano Sukido remembered that this was an analogy that Bai Xinyan had used when she was talking to Yukawa Aishuk. In fact, it was still an analogy. Yes, we just have to be loyal to our duties. Kitano Sukido bowed to Bai Xinyan, and his gaze landed on the first-class cabin behind the observation deck. Right now, the first-class cabin was a mess. A group of bodyguards had survived the disaster, but their sole power had just evaporated. Each of them looked like they were in a daze. Yukawa Aishuk was still lying in the aisle, and the almost forgotten Shanbei Xia Hui was still there. This was a situation that required a lot of effort to clean up. Then again, compared to other related situations, this might be the easiest to clean up. Kitano Sukido began to busy himself with the aftermath. During this time, communication requests from the outside world continued to come in. These requests came from all sorts of directions, but their focus areas were highly overlapping. Thus, a series of high-frequency words were formed. The Amaterasu Order, the Pope, the True God. These words were definitely inescapable, but they would always add some evasive modifiers. In comparison, another word was much more direct. Luonan, 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 buzz buzz buzz. It's weird. Luonan floated under the water of Beishan Lake. A strand of his consciousness was anchored in the clouds 1,000 kilometers away. Doing two things at once was no big deal for him, but there was still some pressure when it came to analyzing and designing the spacetime configuration. He needed to be more focused. At least half of Luonan's mind was still focused on the moment when the sunwheel descended and bombarded the pass in the clouds. He watched as the sunwheel jumped out of nothingness, crushed the obstruction of the spacetime structure, and smashed down on his head. It was just like in a war game, when an exploding fireball was about to hit the player, and then the game was over. Strictly speaking, the game had already been reread once. Luonan's game character, the spacetime bubble he controlled, had already collapsed. It was like this for a moment. The key to the impact of the falling sunwheel was not the impact. The fatal killing move originated from the instantaneous explosive distortion of the surrounding void environment. The spacetime structure was illusory yet thick, empty yet tenacious. But it could still deform in the end, especially when the power of an extraordinary detonated the turbulent tsunami of the abyssal region. Then it interfered with the material plane and focused on the instantaneous explosion. The powerful distortion had already touched upon the plane of laws. It squeezed out all the redundancy in the spacetime structure. Luo Nan couldn't even muster the thought of resisting. He could determine that if he forcefully digested the instantaneous explosive power, the spacetime bubble would certainly not be able to withstand it. The pressure would inevitably return to his body. The sandwich domain was fine, but the exoskeleton frame was already damaged. It would most likely not be able to withstand the pressure. So Luo Nan let it happen. The spacetime bubble collapsed, but the net's core, which had been pouring into the void, was still preserved. Luo Nan quickly reconstructed on this foundation. There was a gap of about 2 seconds between the collapse and the reappearance. It was short, but for the true God and the Pope, 2 seconds was enough to explain the most crucial problem. The spacetime bubble was highly suspicious in its nothingness. I made a mistake. Luo Nan admitted that he had avoided direct damage in that instantaneous collision, but he had also lost his strategic target. He had allowed the true God and the Pope to see part of his bottom line, which would inevitably cause him to be passive. But who would have thought that the true God and the Pope, two extraordinaries, would actually join hands to deal with a junior like him? That's right. The attack of the solar will descending had the true God providing the output and the Pope controlling it. The two extraordinaries had synchronously controlled the propping mulberry tree's great divine treasure system, giving Luo Nan a head-on blow. This blow had shattered Luo Nan's disguise. It had also forced him to reveal the level of his ability. It had made him expose, or at least partially expose, his strategic intent. The following problems would certainly be very thorny. But then again, the true God and the Pope had exposed a lot of information in that moment. Especially the Pope's tree nest structure. It used Yukawa Aishuk and the others as fulcrum and fuel. Admittedly, it saved quite a bit of strength, making it possible to strike a thunderous blow from over 1,000 kilometers away. But at the same time, he had also given Luo Nan a chance. This allowed the altar spiderweb, which had been laid out earlier to probe into the human heart, to seep in. Similarly, Yukawa Aishuk and the others acted as fulcrum, as well as a medium and channel. The subjective perspectives and operations of the true God and the Pope during the pursuit and the solar will descending attack were transmitted back one after another. This was an exquisite operation built upon the level and train of thought of extraordinaries. It was built upon the foundation of the propping mulberry tree's great divine treasure system. Even if Luo Nan had been in the game, he would not have been able to experience this level of detail by relying solely on Yukawa Aishuk and Kitano Suzuto. However, Luo Nan had borrowed the altar's spiderweb to integrate various perspectives. He had cleverly increased the precision and sensitivity of these detectors. He had discarded the blurred, distorted, and exaggerated impressions, forming a stream of information that was like a high-definition video. He could even play it frame by frame and study it over and over again. There was no more beautiful replay than this. Also, Luo Nan felt that he needed to reevaluate the effects of the daydream nightmare incident. It was precisely this early investment that allowed the breadth and depth of the altar's spiderweb to grow explosively. If it weren't for the need of today's actual combat, Luo Nan would not have known that 99% of the passengers on the intercontinental airship had already been pulled into their homes by the spiderweb. It was just a matter of how deep the spiderweb was. Just how many of them would be needed in the entire world to analyze the situation on the airship? As the spiderweb was spread out, the Wraith sign clearly became more and more accustomed to this world. In the past, the human-faced arachnid was fine when it was in the abyss region of the polar domain. But once it sunk into the material plane and probed into the sea of consciousness, it was absolutely impossible to hide from extraordinaries. Some keen psychic ability users were able to sense it. But now, the altar's spiderweb was universally connected. It had practically become a part of the hearts of the entire world. Its concealment ability had become inconceivable. Who didn't have a dark corner where the web had gathered dust? It was just a bit noisy. Chapter 858. By Sinyan, you scheming B*TCH. You've gone too far. The long-awaited instructions came back, and Captain Jimmy's mentality completely collapsed. He roared as he kicked the chair in front of him, and his arm almost hit the nose of the SCA's Minister de Yuan. His entire body had turned into a terrifying storm. It was the team's deputy, Monroe, who was sweating profusely as he tried his best to calm him down. "Boss, calm down. Calm down." Captain Jimmy continued to roar back, "Calm down $*T. $*T process. Every step in here is a piece of garbage pasted with $*T. Then what about you, the initiator?" That sentence could not be said no matter what. Monroe could only stretch out his arms and make a pressing motion, using all his expression and body language to persuade his boss, who was on the verge of losing his mind. "This is a critical time, Jimmy. Think about the airship over 1,000 kilometers away, think about that state. That state of being raised by AB*TCH. That Blackheart Salt is doing this on purpose. This is a shady deal between her and the Blood Flame Order. She's seizing every opportunity possible." Being stared at by Captain Jimmy's charcoal-like eyes, Monroe's mind was momentarily taken away. Aside from being overwhelmed by his aura, he also felt the grade suppression of the 7th-generation dynamo core. His mouth opened and closed twice, but he couldn't finish his sentence in time. "Great, if she wants to disgust us with the process, I'll accompany her to the end. It's just another round of $*T. I'll report the new discovery to the East Asia Department." "Are you deaf? Memory loss? You didn't even record the large piece of intelligence analysis just now? If you want me to collect your salary on your behalf, I'll break your spine as a thank you gift." Captain Jimmy's roar could practically tear open the roof of the warehouse. The poor intelligence officer was suddenly targeted. He didn't even dare to raise his head as he began to work with a sullen face. The intelligence officer's memory was actually far better than that of an ordinary person, and his writing skills were also pretty good. He quickly converted Captain Jimmy's forcefully twisted logical analysis into a rigorous and meticulous document form. Seeing the content of his imagination quickly materialize into words, Captain Jimmy finally grinned. He already couldn't wait to sign and send it over. He didn't expect this kind of one-sided statement to be able to move the bureaucrats of the East Asia Department, as long as it could have the effect of disgusting by Sinyan. Captain Jimmy's expression suddenly changed. "BZZT BZZT BZZT. The sudden vibration signal affected all the members of the operation team in the warehouse. There was almost no delay. At this moment, the dynamo core determined that the main body was in peaceful mode, and immediately displayed the received information on their retinas. Captain Jimmy choked again. He wanted to vent his anger, but in the face of such a high-priority order, he had to temporarily suppress his emotions. Remote conference? Menda pondered over the core words of the notice, but he was also confused. The fewer words, the bigger the matter. A simple meeting notice was sent to every team member, bypassing the frontline commanders. Even when he wasn't at war, he was still extraordinary. Most importantly, it had come at the right time. "Boss, the meeting will start in 10 minutes. Do you think?" Men turned his gaze to the SCA's Minister O'Hara. Captain Jimmy's black and red face still had traces of distortion, but he didn't make a sound and only turned his head to the side. Mend let out a sigh of relief and immediately fulfilled his duties as an assistant. He put on a smile and politely asked Minister O'Hara and the other SCA officials and staff to leave. If they wanted to wait outside, they could wait outside. If they didn't want to, no one would care even if they went home. This layer of buffer was awkward but effective. When Men turned his head, Captain Jimmy had already sat down with his eyebrows furrowed. The intelligence personnel who were chased away felt like they had been pardoned. They focused on adjusting the remote channel and preparing for the meeting. Video conference? Reality conference? Tactical conference? After a quick exchange, the emotions of the operation team members in the warehouse were much more relaxed. They weren't unfamiliar with this kind of situation. As the new generation of burners equipped with the 7th generation dynamo core and operating the latest Deep Blue platform, they were originally expensive experimental subjects. They were deployed all over the world to carry out various missions in order to continuously send back experimental data to support subsequent research. On a more realistic level, they also needed to form a brand new tactical system based on the new platform. It had already become a habit to have a tactical conference every 2 or 3 days to exchange experiences. Things like tonight, which consumed a large amount of resources to achieve the effect of long-distance reality communication on a global scale, only proved the importance of this conference. Captain Jimmy needed to carry out this conference as a tactical command. Everyone in the warehouse became busy. Have the surveillance personnel been withdrawn? In position in 4 minutes. Warning system activated. Inspecting mental link. Link node clear. Group synchronization rate at 97%. Connecting to mirror image 1 network. Connected. Two-way synchronization initiated. Environmental interference index normal. Captain Jimmy glanced at it and saw that the interference rate was floating around 2%. This rate was very low and had no practical value. However, it was already a relatively ideal state for long-distance communication. If it was a requirement for actual combat, it would be at least 10%, which was probably the standard of the previous version of formatted space. Their operation team's record was 47%. As for the laboratory environment, the highest record was a heaven-defying 70%, which was said to be able to kill even extraordinaries. Frankly speaking, up until now, Captain Jimmy wasn't particularly proficient in this kind of combat style. The laboratory, on the other hand, was thinking of all kinds of ways and opportunities to deepen the impression of this batch of experimental subjects. Reality information loading. Countdown to login. 3, 2, 1, the archetype format, symbol that represented the transfer to virtual reality appeared and instantly enlarged. When the tetrahedron, inscribed, and circumscribed spheres expanded to the limit of vision, the emptiness of the central region opened up. The astral winds and clouds in the sky wrapped in the boundless dark curtain of night and rushed towards them. This might be a real scene, or it might be a completely virtual product. Captain Jimmy habitually moved his limbs, but the low interference rate and emptiness made this movement meaningless. He gave up on the warm-up and turned to look around. His operation team had finished assembling and was now in this airspace. In other directions, figures appeared one after another. Most of them were familiar faces. They were all burners who carried the Apocalypse experimental 7th generation dynamo core. Director Yen is over there. Captain Jimmy quickly saw that their true leader, Yen Yonghua, who was known as the pioneer among burners, was not far to the side. He was a gloomy and paranoid guy. More importantly, his authority over the dynamo core was one level higher than most of the people here. Whether it was public or private, Captain Jimmy had to go and greet him. Hold on. Men stopped him for a moment, indicating for Captain Jimmy to observe Yen Yonghua's expression. I'm afraid he's not in a good mood. Oh, virtual reality allowed everyone's external appearance and expression to obtain a high degree of restoration. It could be seen that Yen Yonghua's bad mood was already visible on his face. His face was ashen, clearly indicating that others should stay away. Captain Jimmy was also in a state of violent rage a few minutes ago, but when he saw Yen Yonghua's expression, he suddenly felt that it was better to calm down a bit. Discussing their superiors was everyone's common hobby. Jimmy and Mend were no exception. I remember that he was in a good mood a few days ago. He was waiting to watch a good show. It's an auction. He's waiting for Professor Luo to make a fool of himself. TSK. The two of them understood. It was at this time that a clear graphic presentation appeared in the night of virtual reality. It went straight to the point, informing everyone of the topic of this conference, nature of the conference, tactical seminar. Objective of the conference: conduct an analysis and research on atypical extraordinaries and formulate a targeted tactical plan. Case reference: Intercontinental Airship Attack and Defense Battle Keywords: Luo Nan, True God, Pope of 100 Collections, Configuration, the night sky slightly rippled, and in the next second, an airship appeared in the clouds below. The airship indicator light attracted the gazes of most of the participants. Buzzing sounds of discussion arose. Since this was a tactical seminar, the public channels were all open. The participants who entered virtual reality could use voice, text, images, and even telepathically to communicate with each other. Everyone's information network was quite well informed. They were all very sensitive to the focus of the event. Wow, they really are up to date. The real scene is transcoded. It's not a simulation. Is this first-hand information? Where did it come from? Look at this perspective. It's a mosaic of satellite images. How many satellites did they call over? Then what do you think of this close-up view? The emotions and curiosity of the participants were quickly squeezed out by the fast-paced, high-intensity conference. In reality, the vast majority of meaningless exchanges were suppressed to the point where they disappeared without a trace by the time the demonstration advanced to the stage of the chase between the true god and Luo Nan. And when the grand scene of the sunwheel descending and the cloud pass shattering arrived, everyone was already dizzy from the dazzling scene and the enormous flow of information. Captain Jimmy was one of those who were dizzy. The entire process was played once in less than half an hour. The edited version was played at least 20 times, and the key joints were emphasized over and over 200 times. He was still dizzy even when he returned to the real world. His left eye was the sun, his right eye was lightning, and his brain was full of the cloud pass that was being assembled, burst apart, and then pieced back together. What the hell are they talking about? Yeah, most of it was just guessing. Men's effect of listening to the lecture wasn't much better than Captain Jimmy's. Of course there were explanations in the real scene demonstration. But there were configurations on the left, configurations on the right, and some space-time structure in the middle. The storm of the gully region, coupled with the chaotic and complex structural analysis of the cloud pass, was completely directed in the direction of evaporating one's brain juice. Captain Jimmy was baffled. If one had to consider all these messy things during battle, how would one fight? Perhaps it was because of this that he was holed up in the operations team as a squad leader. But come to think of it, those who had a higher status and authority than him might not be any better off today. The information vibrated over. He glanced at it and felt a little dizzy again. F***CK. Those people from East Asia Institute. Huh, this is good. Mend was baffled. What's wrong? Hee, they're using us to return a favor. Huh. The tactical example just now, the one that just came out, seems to have returned the favor and taken it from the Amaterasu cult. For this, we have to return the favor and temporarily help the Amaterasu cult. We're helping the Amaterasu cult in Band City? Can we afford to? That's what it means, high-level thugs. Captain Jimmy didn't mind at all. Rather than working for someone else, he was more interested in getting out of this boring old warehouse and actually doing something useful. Whether it was dealing with the vagrants or higher-level enemies. Mend, on the other hand, was thinking about something more practical. Who should we contact with the Amaterasu cult? This East Asia Institute is a little too much. Captain Jimmy was stunned. He looked at the contents of the mission again. There was no explanation in this regard at all. This was more troublesome. He tried to find the East Asia Institute to clarify things. Just then, he received an instant message. Captain Jimmy's expression changed immediately when he saw the message. Mend glanced at it and saw the words. By Sinyen. He snorted in his heart and instinctively thought of the worst. He looked at Captain Jimmy again. At this moment, his expression was even worse than Yan Yong's. In the sky above Band City Airport, indicator lights and radio signals intertwined. After 4 to 5 hours of tossing and turning, the huge intercontinental airship returned to the airport. Sigh, on the airship that was about to land, Bai Sinyan sighed. Her slender fingers caressed her forehead, pretending to be weak. I told you that your soul power has evaporated and your mind is damaged. You need to rest. Why didn't you listen to me? Kitano Suzuto glanced at her. He had enough of her exaggerated acting skills. The one who didn't need to act to show that he was extremely worried was his boss. Yukawa Aisha gripped the outer edge of the space capsule tightly. His entire body was tense and rooted to the spot. It was as if he was facing a life and death situation. In fact, in Yukawa Aisha's eyes, the airship that was about to land at Ban City Airport and himself on the airship were bait that was about to be thrown into the devil's mouth. In the future, he would only be eroded by acid. It's all Luo Nan's fault. It's all Luo Nan's fault. Luo Nan. Chapter 859. Sister Yuain, it's true. I just went for a spin. The subsequent developments were completely unexpected. It's nothing. It's really nothing. My limbs are all gone. I didn't even spit out a mouthful of blood. The situation has been too chaotic recently. I need you to take care of the family, Sister Cat Eyes. Hee, you worship me? Then don't make fun of me in the group. I used a portion of the principles of the lamination interference technique in the battle, but it can't be considered a mature application. I will summarize the specifics of the situation, and then we will discuss it. Although Luo Nan had done many world-shaking things during the time he had been away from home, it was only during the previous half an hour that he had taken out his own name. It was during this half an hour that he needed to spend several dozen times the time to deal with the subsequent effects that followed. The Xia City branch was certainly in an uproar. Actually, the inner world was already in a storm not long after the incident. The information channels originating from the Amaterasu Order and Quantum Corporation had already spread the connection between Luo Nan and this matter. But at the time, the situation was unclear. The battle situation was tense. No one dared to contact him for fear of disturbing Luo Nan's attention, giving the enemy an opportunity to take advantage of. The group of people were scared witless. They did not dare to casually send messages until the end of the battle. Luo Nan still had a conscience, or perhaps it could be said that he had a guilty conscience. He took the initiative to leave the silent state of communication and find He Yuain to explain the course of events. This caused a second explosion in his circle of friends. Luo Nan spent a bit of time communicating and explaining to his family and friends in Xia City. This was not difficult. Let's not talk about the reason. Everyone understood his current situation. They respected his choice and strength. They would not drag him into asking questions. The true trouble was outside of his network of connections. Luo Nan, Luo Nan, Luo Nan. Whether it was during the silent state of communication or during the communication with his friends, Luo Nan's ears and heart never had a moment of rest. Yes, his method of misleading true gods and the Pope with his game character had failed. But this spectacular failure was like the strike of the falling sun chakram. It smashed into the hearts of millions of people in the world. And the vast majority of these millions of people had a thin spider thread extracted from their mental plane. The threads interweaved and scattered, building a complex and deep spider web. Now, what he sensed was the echoes of the emotions transmitted by the thousands of people through the spider web. As for the exact number of tens of thousands of people, currently, there are already 90,000 stable, cage bubbles on the altar spiderweb. 100,000? A stable cage represents an awakened who have cultivated successfully. How many people are there in the entire inner world? According to Luo Nan's impression of the latest statistics, the number of registered ability users in the entire world was only around 76,000. This was the result of explosive growth in the last half year. Of course, this number did not include the nomads of the wilderness, the military's burners, and the ever-increasing number of human mutants. But even if these people were included, the number of people bound to Luo Nan's altar spiderweb covered over 90% of the world's awakened. As for the ability users that were even further away, similar to worker Zhai before he awakened, their numbers were 10 times greater than the previous group. Without a doubt, this was another, full coverage. As for the bubbles of ordinary people that were born and extinguished with the passage of time, their scale was enormous, and their changes were rapid. They had already lost the meaning of statistics. Rather than calculating numbers, it was better to evaluate the breadth of the space they covered. It was more or less the same as the soul cloak. There definitely weren't this many in the past. Luo Nan had done a similar inventory before. It definitely wasn't on this scale. He had already guessed why. The daybreak nightmare is very powerful. The abyss world's might is boundless. But right now, this isn't the main point. Luo Nan's current name was only known by a few people in the government, the military, and the upper echelons of the business world. But from the perspective of the inner world, Luo Nan's name could already be said to shake the world. There was no one who didn't know him. Especially this sort of freshly minted extraordinary information. It involved extraordinaries, and it also stirred the secular world into action. It formed a news event with global influence. Anyone who was close to this circle could not avoid talking about it a few times. In this way, hundreds and thousands of people revolved around Luo Nan every minute and every second. Their thoughts unfolded, and they even conversed with this name. A storm of information and a maelstrom with no end gradually converged within the constantly changing space and time. If it were someone else, this storm would only exist within the transmission and storage of various media, relying on a material carrier to exist. But for Luo Nan, it was a different situation. The altar's spiderweb stood in the void, appearing and disappearing in the hearts of people. The noise that echoed in the mind was like the vibrating hum of mosquitoes and flies. Not only did it make clear the core meaning, it also informed every noise-making node without restraint of the location, medium of transmission, flow trajectory, and even emotional color. This was the resonance between the human communication network and the altar's spiderweb. It was the deep level of information in the material and mental domains. It was the comprehensive feedback of Luo Nan's deep and rich layers of senses. At this very moment, Luo Nan's eyes and the bottom of his heart reflected such a complicated background and complex world. It was precisely because of the complexity that the noise surged with large amounts of repetitive and redundant information. It formed a surging flood that washed over him without end. This is a bit annoying. Though he said this, Luo Nan's state of mind was still quite calm. It was unknown when it started, but dealing with this information storm that could collapse and burn brain cells had already become a part of Luo Nan's daily life. The grand structure of the living starry sky, the global coverage of the soul cloak, the trillions of fragments of the misty maze, the sun wheel and absolute purgatory formed together into the abyss world. Again and again, each wave was more powerful than the last. In the end, Luo Nan was equipped with an immunity. This made him no longer drift with the tide. Instead, he followed his own logic to buffer, precipitate, divide, and even analyze and integrate the enormous amount of information. In fact, the information storm that surrounded Luo Nan was much more regular than the attacks he had suffered before. The regularity represented familiarity and order. Luo Nan subconsciously muttered, "Oh me." At this time, he was the incarnation of a small wooden stick that reached into the cotton candy machine. From the grand structure of heaven, earth, and the hearts of people, he accumulated sugar threads to form a marvelous cloud-like creation. It would be quite good if he could create cotton candy with ordinary craftsmanship. But if he used himself as a yardstick, transformed his knowledge into rules, measured the hearts of people, and followed the law to create things. Luo Nan closed his eyes, and his thoughts naturally poured into the altar's spiderweb. Within the complex layers of the network, on the back of the wraith sign that climbed up and down, within the flood of information and life force that weaved back and forth, there seemed to be an incorporeal 3D printer operating, causing a certain silhouette to gradually appear. That appearance was that of Luo Nan. Compared to Luo Nan of the real world, the two were like human figures inside and outside a mirror. They were mirror images of each other. Only some of the details weren't perfect enough. They needed to be corrected. Chapter 860. Everyone has a heart that strives for perfection. They want to fix imperfections. Luo Nan's thoughts shuttled back and forth on the mirror image, comparing it with each other. It was more or less the action of looking into a mirror. And the more he examined and corrected it, the more detailed the mirror image revealed. This was not strange. This was because this was the accumulation of images, emotions, and calculations in the hearts of hundreds of thousands of people. Thanks to the blessing of modern imaging technology, very few people would mistake him. At the very least, they had a basic understanding of his appearance. This guaranteed the basic recognition of the mirror image. But under the appearance of convergence, everyone had their own understanding of Luo Nan in their hearts. Just as the saying goes, different people have different opinions. The vast majority of people had fixed impressions based on the guidance of various media, but they more or less had their own opinions. There were overpraise, prejudice, vilification. And they were using modern convenient channels of information to rapidly communicate with each other, influencing and overlaying each other. In this way, the corresponding accumulation of images became more and more cumbersome, redundant, complex, and contradictory. Most importantly, it was distorted. This gave Luo Nan the fulcrum to pry open people's hearts. But it was precisely this distortion that passed through the spiderweb of the altar and converged onto the mirror image. The surface was calm, but the inside was conflicting and colliding with each other. It could collapse and fall apart at any time. The reason why it did not collapse was because the mirror image existed in advance. It was the basic core that Luo Nan had already established. It was built on the foundation of formatting theory. It went through the polishing of the 9 orifices 6 roots martial arts philosophy. It went through the deepening of coupling theory, and it went through the immersion of the condensation ring and other configuration concepts. Luo Nan relied on this to construct the glorious and resplendent living starry sky, touching upon every corner of the complex and real world. Of course, the system brought by the Wraith sign had always surrounded and influenced him. And all of this, if traced back to the source, could be attributed to the abyssal world sun will and absolute hell. It was a vast and dangerous balance. Luo Nan had deduced this when he researched the lamination interference technique. Now he naturally used it. It was this clear dissection that anchored a relatively stable fulcrum for Luo Nan between heaven, earth, and the hearts of people. The changes of the wind and clouds in the surroundings had a fixed foundation. It could be deduced and born from basic rules. Of course, these rules were still fuzzy, but they were already divided into near and far, virtual and real and illusory. Even in the complex overlapping space and time, in the distorted and chaotic bewilderment of the hearts, they could still firmly exist. And on this foundation, they dealt with the distorted image transmitted by the altar's spiderweb and deduced more essential things. Overall, this core might not be and the core might not be perfect, but its source was clear and the direction was correct. At this moment, it could be seen that the torrent of thoughts formed by hundreds of thousands of people was not entirely a burden. It was good to have those distortions, contradictions, and conflicts. Though some of the images of Luo Nan in people's hearts weren't realistic enough, they were proven to be achievable through deduction. They harvested some fantastic ideas. Some of them appeared to be very reasonable, but after deduction, they discovered that their current strength was insufficient. There were also some that were completely off the mark in their deductions. Their roots were wrong, and they didn't belong to him at all. So in Luo Nan's eyes, the mirror image on the altar's spiderweb grew more and more real. The distorted and chaotic elements were gradually expelled from the mirror image. They were like clouds of mist, spiraling and undulating. Oh, was it a misconception? Luo Nan suddenly sensed something. The veil of invisibility that his main body carried seemed to have become a bit thicker. That's right. Luo Nan even captured the source of the change. The mist that had been expelled formed a mirror image as well. It crossed the barrier between real and illusory, entering the domain of the real world. It reacted with the veil of invisibility, fusing with the veil of invisibility. It was an order that had existed long ago. Luo Nan's thoughts followed the distorted elements and transformed mist. They naturally entered the depths of the veil of invisibility, touching upon the veil of mist and the order that had existed long ago. It was like an ornament that hung behind a gauze curtain. It was faintly discernible, but it was arranged in disorder and categorized. Every individual ornament was a convoluted creation of its own rules. There seemed to be some sort of orderly connection between them. Without a doubt, these were all things that had been analyzed, used, and stored by the stacking interference technique. When combined with the essence of this technique, it was like a mask. As long as one put it on, one would instantly become another person. Of course, the vast majority of these masks could not be used. After all, Luo Nan had yet to create a true corresponding spirit core. He had only drafted a private version of the configuration design. This was the difference between the public version and the private version. There were many intelligent and automated steps that required him to do it personally. He had to research and ponder over them one by one to find the corresponding activation program. Only then could he use them. But in any case, he had walked the right path. Not only did the previous accumulations exist within the veil of invisibility, new elements were constantly precipitating. They grew in number and clarity. They originated from Luo Nan himself. They came from his core. All sorts of abilities, skills, and rules were analyzed within the core. They were transformed into materials and components, arranged in order. All sorts of designs were needed to be pieced together in order to finally form a complete and logical mask template. For example, based on the condensation ring, he had already derived skills such as the water drop sword and soul cloak. Going even more complicated, the cloud pass, he had just created involved basic materials from other domains and was pieced together under the rules of the configuration system. But from the looks of it, this was just a semi-finished product. He needed to review and research many times before he could finally take shape. And even if he did take shape, this kind of template would be relatively monotonous. Was he supposed to go out and fight enemies? Was he supposed to hide inside like a tortoise? He needed to bring out a set of combo punches. Of course, this series of materials that belonged to Luo Nan had already been integrated into his current default template framework. Overall, it was already quite mature. And this default template seemed to be able to perform more perfectly than Luo Nan's body and soul framework. After all, this was the product of theorization. Speaking of which, the stacking interference technique was very much like an analytical tool when used. It could perform an in-depth analysis of the various elements contained within itself, or it could perform combinatorial experiments. It was simply like a laboratory cum dressing room. It was an extremely efficient operating environment. But no matter how efficient it was, Luo Nan still needed to expend quite a bit of effort to reassemble a new template, especially one that could completely conceal his identity. Luo Nan found a new toy, and his mind naturally fiddled with it. During this process, the mirror image on the altar's spiderweb and his true self in the real world intersected and fused on a deeper level. The space-time bubble around his body correspondingly transformed into a faintly discernible mist. It was lively and fleeting. It seemed to be supported by an incorporeal flow of air, and sunlight and moonlight rotated and poured into it. It transformed into boundless colors and shapes. And as he fiddled with it, the original decorations and the new products that had gradually accumulated flowed through his mind like a horse lantern, allowing him to inspect his memories. This one had just been precipitated. It was useful. It was too simple. This one looked very reliable, but he couldn't find the right door to enter. And this one. Huh. Luo Nan's mind suddenly came into contact with something that was half old and half new. It was like a bizarre mountain range hidden by clouds and mist. There were grotesque rocks and jagged rocks that spiraled and stacked on top of each other. They formed a structure of their own, and magma snaked and flowed within. At first glance, it looked like a mountain of flames in the depths of fiendish prison. But its relatively flat peak and its corresponding layout made it look more like a special altar model. The Blood Soul Temple? Chapter 861. Snake Tongue suddenly woke up from her meditative state. The living room of the yacht was empty. Yin Lu was nowhere to be seen. The virtual work area was still lit up, and the interface was constantly refreshing with information. Ability users from all over the world were revolving around the hot topic of last night. Wave after wave of discussions were launched, and the keywords were none other than Luo Nan, the airship, the Amaterasu Order, and so on. For the spectators, the matter was over, and it was time for them to show their strength. But for the people involved, was it really over? Snake Tongue looked at the time. It was approximately 4 a.m. It had only been 5 or 6 hours since the intercontinental airship incident. The atmosphere in Band City was still very low, making her heart feel heavy. Snake Tongue adjusted her aura and followed the feeling in her heart. She slowly stood up. There was no one around, but she still took traditional steps out of the living room and took the small elevator to the upper deck. There were few lights on the passenger terminal, but the darkest hour had passed. The railings on the deck chairs, and other decorations all revealed their silhouettes in the dusk. At the same time, there was a figure at the bow of the ship, who knew how long it had been standing there. Secretary Ian. Madam North Mountain. Even though they had adjusted it many times, the way they addressed each other was not precise enough. They were unfamiliar and polite, just like their relationship. Don't you want to rest for a while? There are some matters in the headquarters that need to be dealt with. Thank you for your hard work. D-City was 3 hours earlier than Band City, so it was about time to deal with things. Needless to say, some things did not care about time. Just like this moment. Snake Tongue only casually greeted him. Her gaze and mind were cast outside the yacht. The bow of the anchored yacht was pointing towards the east. The lake was vast, and one could see everything at a glance. One could even see the glaze that had been quietly painted on where the water met the sky. At this time, the ground was still being colored layer by layer. A few clouds were piled there randomly. Stirred by the changing colors, they vaguely turned into indigo mountains, adding a sense of composition to the design. Snake Tongue furrowed her brows slightly. She looked at the sky and clouds in the distance, which were gradually brightening. The feeling in her heart seemed to have been illuminated a little, but it still wasn't vivid enough. Enla followed her line of sight and gently exhaled. Is it sunrise? I thought there would be no sun today, thick clouds, and low atmospheric pressure. It doesn't feel good enough. The conversation that had been going on and on was suddenly stuck here. In fact, both sides of the conversation had captured a common understanding from each other's perception. They didn't say anything else and just stared at the boundary of the water and sky from afar. The sun was still below the horizon, but at this moment, in the layers of glaze, in the indigo mist mountain range, there was clearly a different type of power stirring restlessly. It was hidden deep under the vast laws of nature, but it could not wait to stretch out its claws. It was even half a step beyond the newborn sun. In the eastern horizon, it pressed out a ferocious shape. Yun! Enlu exclaimed. The azure cloud peak that was piled up on the horizon suddenly collapsed. Then, under the distortion of that clear power, branches were pulled out, almost losing the nature that clouds should have, turning into the shadow that came with that power, following the contours of the sky and the water body, extending in all directions. The amount of clouds over there wasn't much. After a few stretches, they became so thin that they couldn't be seen. However, the image of the roots spreading out, piercing into the void, and supporting the structure of water and sky was still deeply engraved in Snake Tongue and Enli's pupils and hearts. The Fusang Divine Tree. Snake Tongue subconsciously extended her hand, wanting to cover her eyes, but it was already too late. She lowered her arm halfway, and her face turned pale. She had just looked directly at the operation of a high-level power and subconsciously analyzed it. It had caused quite a bit of a backlash for her. Who knew how many unlucky people were like her in the past few minutes in the entirety of Band City? Enlu was much better off because she was already used to borrowing the power of the Blood Soul Temple of the Abyss District to observe high-level things. Although the Blood Soul Temple of the Abyss District seemed to have changed again. What method is this? Enli's mind was suspended in the Abyss District, painstakingly distinguishing the deeper meaning behind the turbulent storm. Unfortunately, her level wasn't high enough. She became more and more confused as she watched. It's nothing more than a seal. Snake Tongue was unable to sense the details, but she understood the gist of it even more. It's not a good thing. Enli's thoughts were chaotic. The Amaterasu Order wants to make a move in Band City? This is their headquarters. This isn't the first time. Snake Tongue paused for a moment, then concluded, it just depends on who they're targeting. Enrich suddenly turned her head. Where is Mr.? Yeah, where was Luo Nan? Even at this critical moment, that person had stubbornly disappeared without a trace. Whether it was Snake Tongue or Enrich, they could half guess and half feel the faint light of the first rays of dawn. They could feel the gradually extending and gradually permeating psychic pressure. There was still a bit of coolness in the northern mountain lake during the early hours of the morning. But as the faint light of dawn enveloped them, their bodies inexplicably felt a bit hot and dry. It stirred their energies, making them feel quite uncomfortable. This change was much more direct and sharp than the change in the clouds at the edge of the sky. Snake Tongue lowered her eyelids and tightened her mind. She whispered, "Don't expose yourself to the outside." Indeed. Enrich gave one last glance at the light of the clouds at the edge of the sky. She turned around and walked back, but she hadn't taken 2 steps when she sensed something at the same time as Snake Tongue. In the blink of an eye, the two saw a small flying machine suddenly soar into the sky from the warehouse at the dock. It didn't obey the traffic rules of the peaceful trade market. It flew straight into the clouds and soon disappeared from their line of sight. Enrich and Snake Tongue glanced at each other. They both furrowed their brows. In this kind of situation, as long as one was an ability user, they would have to make some sort of reaction. However, most of them would be like Enrich and Snake Tongue. They would be muddle-headed and make guesses. Captain Jimmy's reaction was too obvious. This wasn't strange. After all, they were backed by Quantum Corporation and even the government and military. On the other hand, over at the inner world, the two hurriedly returned to the living room on the lower deck. It was quite strange. As they entered the shadowy area of the cabin, the discomfort brought about by the disturbance of energy naturally calmed down. The effects were immediate. They just didn't know if this was a temporary phenomenon. The projection work area was still flickering at this time. The interface where Luo Nan and the Amaterasu Order spammed before finally had some other elements mixed in, Band City, Fantasy Clouds. This topic had just appeared for a few seconds when another freshly baked topic flipped to the top. Band City Sunrise. Please help me decipher it. Vitality is restless? I nearly went berserk just now. The coordinates are the Shitian district of Band City. The Divine Tree's Kingdom of Heaven descends. Since the topics discussed in the forum were closely related to Band City, the words that followed easily swept away a large amount of attention from the world. Enrich opened a few posts and similar topics became very influential. She used the waterfall mode of intelligent categorization to automatically select keywords. She scrolled for over half an hour, but the more she scrolled, the more she scrolled. However, the majority of the posts were pictures, descriptions, conjectures, and the like. Aside from pointing the spearhead at the Amaterasu Order, there wasn't anything useful. Enrich's brows furrowed. She wanted to go to a more professional circle to take a look. Just as she left the post page, she saw a new post that was highlighted, pinned to the top, and other effects. It forcefully appeared in the very center of the work area. The bright red words were extremely glaring. Most importantly, the poster was from the Band City branch of the Ability User Society. Enrich's wristband buzzed and vibrated at this moment. She lowered her head to glance at it, and her brows furrowed even tighter. This is troublesome. The forum post opened as she spoke. The information on the wristband was split into 2 screens and projected onto the work area. The reason why Enrich did this was because the things described on both sides were exactly the same. Even the words and sentences used were exactly the same. The gist of it was that Band City's side discovered that an extremely dangerous mutant had infiltrated. The Amaterasu Order was righteous and had taken the initiative to open a so-called divine nation to protect the safety of the citizens. The Band City branch demanded that all ability users in Band City immediately register online and report their location as well as the brief situation of the nearby ability users. They were to cooperate with the banned city government and the SCA in conducting a comparison of social authority in order to ensure safety and so on. Big Soa's entire city. Is the banned city branch sticking their faces under the feet of a true god? Are they willing to act like cows and horses to play with? The above words weren't said by Yin Lu or Snake Tongue. It was the ridicule of some spectator on the forum. However, this person's words hit the nail on the head. As an ability user society branch organization without an extraordinary overseeing it, the banned city branch had already been reduced to a vassal of the Amaterasu order over a decade ago. Normally, it was invisible. Now that it had jumped out, it was nothing more than a marionette on stage. This is, looking for Mr. Yin Lu and Snake Tongue looked at each other once more. They both felt that trouble was imminent. The power of the Amaterasu order, coupled with the semi-official nature of the banned city branch, really did possess something akin to a legal coercion in the inner world. It was more or less the same as, fight if you don't accept it. Even if they were cooperating, Yin Lu could go register, but she was the only candidate who could register. It was true that Snake Tongue had an ordinary identity in banned city, but in the end, it was just a facade. She had always hidden her true identity and notoriety. Not to mention Luo Nan, who had made his debut under the name of Mr. Mo. However, there was no such person as Mr. Mo in this world. Even though Yin Lu had left some arrangements in D City over the past 2 days, it was enough to deal with normal situations. The people on the ship gathered together and corroborated each other. The logical clues were chaotic. To sum it up, suspects. However, wasn't this a bit of a roundabout way too big? I thought we were going to charge into geosynchronous orbit and then turn back. Isn't Mars better? Captain Jimmy walked into the main hall with large strides. He had circled back from the Quantum Corporation branch in Ban City. The private airship had just finished connecting with his flying craft. However, the sarcasm in his words was not limited to his family's itinerary. Bai Xinyan could be seen from afar standing in front of a projected area that was not yet clear. Her complexion was normal, and she was even smiling and greeting Captain Jimmy. Next to her was Yukawa Isuk. He had an unlucky expression on his face. He was sickly and dispirited. He turned a blind eye to Captain Jimmy's arrival. You're beating around the bush because you can't find him. Hee, you're still so self-confident. Captain Jimmy was still a bit confused about the new mission he had been assigned. He only knew that he was to assist the Amaterasu order in finding a powerful individual who had been in hiding for a long time. However, this did not stop him from fiercely attacking Bai Xinyan when the opportunity presented itself. This is the truth. The Amaterasu order has used methods that are close to flipping the table. From sunrise until now, they still haven't locked onto their target. Bai Xinyan carelessly brought up the Amaterasu order. It said that this is due to the surrounding area having some convoluted and distorted spacetime dimensions. Excluding natural phenomena, it's the interference of the extraordinary plane. It's a shielding interference. It's also a big problem. The one who concluded was a middle-aged man of unclear age. He did not come here in person, but rather appeared in the projection area. The most direct impression he gave others was that he was bald. His eyebrows and beard were sparse, and his skin was pale. He gave others the feeling that he didn't have enough nutrients to support the growth of his hair. He looked very thin and weak. Perhaps this had something to do with the large robe he wore. The 7th generation Dynamo Core had already recorded the data of all the extraordinaries in the world, and it was updated in real time. Captain Jimmy completed the match in the first instance. He immediately straightened his legs and puffed out his chest. Your Majesty. This bald middle-aged man was the Pope of the 100 Collections. Jimmy was still puzzled. This Majesty had just finished attacking Luo Nan, yet he came back to find trouble. Where was the logic? Captain Jimmy was not an idiot. He looked at the 3 people gathered before him and thought of last night's arduous training. He suddenly grasped the inner connection within. Trouble equals Luo Nan? Was this scene set up for Luo Nan? But wasn't that fellow several thousand kilometers away? Could it be that he had returned? Bai Xinyan suddenly asked, Your Majesty, do you think that there's someone behind Luonan? There's no need to rush to conclusions. The Pope of the 100 Collections faintly smiled. His face was sparse with hair, and his expression was amiable. The truth is that there's a strange existence in Ban City right now. He's suspected to be an extraordinary, but he's different from all the other extraordinaries on Earth. Of course, we need to investigate his background. He might not be a living person. If he's not a living person, then what is he? It's hard to estimate. The initial probing won't have any results. After all, I'm not proficient in the mental side. The Pope of the Amaterasu Order, Majesty, was the spiritual leader of millions of believers. He was the world's top mental extraordinaire. For him to say that he wasn't proficient in the mental side was truly the biggest joke in the world. The Pope still smiled amiably. You can't view the convenience of horse racing as an ability. Besides, there's no future in the mental side. Perhaps you agree? Captain Jimmy discovered that he couldn't get a word in edgewise. He was the same as Yukawa Aishuk next to him. They were completely superfluous. He only heard Bai Xinyan respond. The road ahead was paved by a character like Majesty. How could I think so much? Oh, the registration of the Ban City branch has been updated. Tell me about it. Currently, there are more than 3,400 people registered. Among them, 700 are at least awakened. As she spoke, Bai Xinyan projected another distribution map. With Ban City as the background, the map was dotted with dots of varying density. Next to him, Yukawa Aishuk's pupils dilated slightly. He secretly compared the image with the information he had. He felt that this included almost all the secret orders and supernatural organizations in Osaka. Even if it wasn't 100% accurate, it was close to 80% accurate. Not enough, the Pope said simply. The time limit isn't up yet. This is a problem of attitude. I will convey Majesty's opinion. Bai Xinyan shrugged. Next, Majesty, please arrange for your subordinates to communicate with the various orders and organizations in Ban City. The Ban City branch and the SCA will send a message to those who have records but haven't voluntarily registered. If necessary, they will visit and urge them. All work will be completed by 1:30 p.m. By that time, Ban City will have more or less been plowed, and we can begin the next phase of the operation. Captain Jimmy also stared at the distribution map and searched for relevant information. His mind was racing. After a few seconds, he suddenly spoke. Does our team also need to report? Bai Xinyan glanced at him. Her eyes were clear and calm, but in Captain Jimmy's eyes, there was a hidden meaning. He liked this, especially liked to destroy this. So, he spoke again. For the past few days, we have been neighbors with a few aptitude users. We also watched them work and discuss business. They probably aren't locals of Ban City. So far, it seems like they haven't registered yet. Chapter 862. Around 10 in the morning in Ban City, after nearly 6 hours of fermenting, the internal forum of the Ability User Association was already overflowing with noise. Once the matter was related to personal interests and dignity, the thoughts of the spectators would become a direct sense of immersion. Then it would transform into corresponding emotions. This was what was known as the will of the people. Of course, this sort of thing erased the warm and tender feelings of the so-called legal principles of social order. When it came to crossing the chasm of strength, it was mostly useless. The most obvious evidence was the progress of the registration. It was still advancing steadily, forming a densely woven net that tightened one's flesh. This sort of method completely relied on superior resources to crush them. There wasn't the slightest bit of ingenuity, yet it left people helpless. Truthfully speaking, there was always a bit of buffer space within the crushing of society's resources alone. What truly gave the ability users in Ban City a sense of oppression and suffocation was the sunlight that sprinkled down to every corner of the city. The sun had already risen to the top of their heads. Its heat and penetrative power continued to rise. It didn't matter if one was outdoors or indoors. It didn't matter if one was exposed to direct sunlight or hidden in the shadows. The all-pervasive light waves could always permeate the surroundings of people. They carried the tyrannical interference imprint of the Amaterasu order. They were like demonic eyes floating in the air, radiating a gaze filled with blazing malice. Enlu and Snake Tongue were on the bottom deck. For the first time, they felt resentment towards the brilliant lighting design of this area. They had already closed the light baffles of the portholes, isolating them as much as possible from the sunlight. The lights inside were also extinguished to distinguish the direction of the penetrating light. The entire living room was dusky. The only source of light was the virtual work area. Subconsciously, Enlu and Snake Tongue had already stopped conversing. Their body movements grew less and less. They even stopped looking at the constantly refreshing forum messages. They each occupied a different angle, curled up their bodies, and restrained their auras. It was as if they were in a narrow and claustrophobic cage under 24-hour surveillance. They were like clay sculptures or wooden statues. They didn't know whether or not they had already been exposed. In fact, it didn't matter whether they knew or not. Right now, all responses and all pretenses would become weak and laughable in the face of the chasm that was like a heavenly moat. Frequently coming into contact with existences of that level, they had a corresponding introspection and self-awareness. Time passed little by little. Snake Tongue's state of mind went from doubt to disturbance, and then gradually returned to tranquility. His rich life experience, especially in the past half a year, had already polished a persevering and tenacious heart. She temporarily couldn't understand life and death, but as long as she could survive, no matter how difficult the situation was, it didn't seem to be more torturous than the previous 200 days. When one's heart calmed down, one's senses would naturally arise. The feeling did not originate from the stimulation of the sky barrier, but from the spiritual level. It was almost a natural disturbance, like air currents and water waves. They had existed since a long time ago, but they were too common, causing people to unconsciously overlook them. Snake Tongue even felt that this wasn't an external stimulus, but rather a subtle and mysterious connection. At this moment, all external activities were immersed in a high-risk environment, and she was under multiple constraints and restrictions. Moreover, it was not a good time to meditate and cultivate, so her attention was naturally drawn by this subtle connection. Furthermore, she also discovered that the other end of the connection, or rather, a key node, was right beside her. It was on Enlu, who had also entered a state of silence. This was the so-called subtle mystery. Once the mind was biased, the connection between the two would naturally be strengthened. On the other side, the eyelids of Enlu, who had her eyes closed in contemplation, twitched. She opened her eyes to a slit, and her pupils turned slightly to make contact with Snake Tongue's gaze. This allowed her to further confirm that the connection really did exist, and it was extremely sharp. Was this a type of mutual telepathy? It was more or less related to Luonan. When was it established? What was the point of safety in the current situation? The thoughts in Snake Tongue's mind couldn't help but grow, but she soon came to a realization. There was no meaning in thinking about these things because she most likely wouldn't obtain an immediate answer. It was clear that although Enlu sensed it, she was in a state of astonishment. Just as both sides were probing, contacting, and researching, a telepathic thought suddenly interjected. It was unfamiliar beyond their imaginations, but it had the flavor of familiarity. It was like a drunken stupor and relaxation. A new person has entered the boss's territory. What's the situation right now? The sudden insertion of his will instantly picked up the obscure form and caused the power behind this layer of subtle connection to expand with a hum. The increase in energy level brought about a direct feeling, which was the change in luminosity. It was like a flash of light in a dark room. It flickered and died, but it was enough for people to see the outline of a scene that exceeded their expectations. Of course, this was on the mental plane. Whether it was Enlu or Snake Tongue, they were both shocked. In comparison, Enli's mental strength was a notch lower. Her habitually suppressed telepathic thought had a clear increase. It was as if a bomb had been set off in a relatively quiet space. Who is it? A pitiful person who works for some boss. Perhaps the other party felt that this explanation was too confusing, so she added, to put it nicely, I'm like a secretary or a maid. To put it bluntly, I'm like a leashed cat or dog. I forgot to introduce myself. I'm called Cat Eyes. When the other party frankly introduced herself, the latent power that had burst forth from the stimulation of their telepathic exchange returned to tranquility. It quickly settled down, just like a flash of light that had been polished and then extinguished. It was just that after settling down, the flickering embers naturally possessed a certain law. When Cat Eyes finished introducing herself, the result of the law's guidance had already changed from a quantitative change to a qualitative change. It had accumulated to a meaning of existence that could be sensed by the 3 female ability users of similar statuses. This was a relatively meticulous structure, and it possessed an extremely distinct sense of space. Cat Eyes, Snake Tongue, and Enlo resided on the mental plane. Their eyes, ears, mouth, nose, and all sorts of other senses, as well as their perception of the external material world, were separated by a layer. Only the mental plane, the law and order that gradually became clear, gradually appeared in a pattern that they could understand. The feeling of the flash of light in the dark room was far too vivid, so much so that the 3 of them still felt that this was a dusky room of unknown size. They maintained a relatively close distance between each other, similar to the type where they stood side by side. Due to the accumulation of changes in their perception, Snake Tongue and Enlo weren't able to react in time to Cat Eye's self-introduction. Only after a few seconds did Enlo speak, Cat Eyes? Xia City's Cat Eyes? After half a year of in-depth understanding, Enlo naturally knew that Cat Eyes was a member of Luo Nan's circle of friends. But for them to meet under these circumstances, it seemed that their identities weren't as simple as just friends. If it was a deeper layer, was she a forbidden zone? It had to be said that Cat Eyes' attitude gave the 3 a good start in their interaction. Under her good example, and of course within Luo Nan's domain, Snake Tongue and Enlo had no meaning in hiding their identities. Their self-introductions naturally came. There was a certain awkwardness in this period of time. After all, their identities and positions were more or less contradictory in the public social network of the inner world. However, Cat Eyes didn't nitpick. Whether it was Enlo, who came from the Blood Flame Order, who was deeply involved in the Sun Jiai intermediary case, or Enlo, who was once her mortal enemy, Snake Tongue, who was theoretically missing or even dead, she only clicked her tongue twice. She quickly returned to a more realistic level. You guys are all in Ban City. What are you helping him do? Work? Daily life? Warm the bed? We're just listening to Mister's arrangements. Enlo appropriately followed up, allowing the idle chatter to have a relatively smooth relay. Things aren't going well now that the Divine Kingdom's canopy has opened, right? That's true. Is there any news or reaction from Xia City? There's an uproar, but we're just watching the excitement. But looking at your current situation. Cat Eyes snorted twice. Everyone says that the boss fought a battle with the Amaterasu Order on the Pacific Ocean. Now that he's overcome his calamity and broken through, he's like a flying bird and a jumping fish. But if that's the case, it doesn't seem to be the case. It's a bit complicated. Ian Lee's mood was indeed quite complicated. I understand your feelings, but it's the same as before. I really don't understand what in the world is going through someone's mind. His lordship's previous arrangements were always like this? Snake Tongue joined in as well. Their telepathic communication was a bit more straightforward than usual. Yeah. It's a mess. But in the end, he's always forcefully rescuing the situation, giving people the misconception that he's unfathomable. Cat Eyes was happy to introduce her experiences to these 2 latecomers, even though she didn't really understand the current situation. In the past, Cat Eyes often borrowed the living starry sky, the large production line, and other similar mental domain structures to launch a long-distance mental link with Luo Nan. But those were relatively abstract mediums. It was like facing the void, crossing unexplainable dimensions. But in the current situation, it seemed that there was a solid structure that gathered the souls of the three together. It was like. Before they could make a clearer judgment, light and shadow appeared within the empty room. Moreover, it formed into a visual image that could be easily understood. The first thing that appeared was the scenery of a chaotic sky filled with clouds. They could even hear astral winds blowing past, whistling through the air. The sound and color were both present and extremely vivid. In this special stage, Cat Eyes and the other two quickly thought back to the scene from last night. Cat Eyes snorted again. What's going on? A fortress in the clouds, a falling sun, yesterday reappearing? Yin Luo was probably thinking the same thing. On the other hand, Snake Tongue's thoughts had an additional layer. Perhaps this was the cloud world that had trapped her for half a year? As the thoughts of the three deviated, the image that appeared changed. In the depths of the clouds, rules and laws were vaguely visible within. As the astral winds blew, the surrounding clouds dispersed. However, there were also a few strands of yarn that were entangled with the enormous creation within. Under the interaction of the two, a silhouette was gradually revealed. Oh, it really is. The scene that appeared before the eyes of the three was clearly a fortress formed from clouds. Even though the background was a vast azure sky, it still towered majestically. Especially its connection to the surrounding clouds. It was as if a cloud that covered the horizon was fluttering and fluttering. The rules were built within, causing the clouds that filled the sky to be immersed in laws even as they unfolded and flew. It was simply like a military line that could be retracted and retracted freely. In fact, it wasn't just the outer layer. The cloud fortress that served as the base of the image was also constantly changing. Every region in the depths of the condensed, seemingly substantial clump of clouds had minute changes. This was reflected in the basic silhouette. There were also slight adjustments. After looking at it for a long time, the scale of time became a bit blurry. It was as if they were appreciating the effects of a time-lapse photography. The endless flow of time and the changes of a macroscopic perspective were compressed into a scale that they could understand. The special effects are pretty good. I can't see anything deeper than that. Cat Eye's evaluation was basically the consensus of the three. From the looks of it, the image displayed was still a certain distance from the real world. It was as if the three of them were in a movie theater, watching the image displayed on an enormous screen. If one were to lower their expectations, it could be considered more realistic. But if one were to use a harsh attitude to evaluate it, there was a barrier called reality between them and the image. The boss called us over for the sake of letting everyone watch a movie and relax. It's also possible that he's teaching us live. When considering Luo Nan's temperament, as well as the fact that they couldn't relax in Ban City, Cat Eye's second half of her judgment was quite agreeable. The three of them were all observing and pondering. The large screen in front of them was playing what seemed to be a large-scale production, but it still lacked an immersive experience. It was as if the three of them were sitting in a traditional movie theater. They interacted with each other under the dusky lighting. They could only see the blurry silhouettes of each other, but they were unable to see any further details. This sort of analogical experience made it easier for them to adapt to their current environment. It allowed their communication to become smoother. Yin shared her new feeling. It seems like there's something else inside the cloud fortress. Where is it? There's a bloody glow in the middle. Is there? There isn't. Yin Luo was very baffled. Her current mental state was also very baffled. Her mind was naturally divided into two parts. One part was communicating with people in the movie theater that was neither real nor fake, unable to see through the bewilderment barrier. The other part was stationed in the Abyss District. It was closely connected to the structure of the Blood Soul Temple in the Abyss District, forming a transparent high-level clairvoyance. The two parts of her mind didn't conflict. They were both real and real. Gradually, she could feel the structure of the Blood Soul Temple in the Abyss District. There existed a rather rhythmic warped undulation. This caused her mind to sway, and she was quite pleasantly surprised. It was probably because this feeling was very familiar. She would come back to it from time to time in the past half year. According to Mrs. Halder, this was someone's usual experimental method. The foundation of the blood flame order was essentially nothing more than a set of experimental products for that person. As the deputy first oblatum of the order, it was actually a bit difficult for Lo to adapt to this rhythm. But under the current circumstances, this distortion that affected the foundation of her extraordinary strength was like a gently swaying swing. It brought her along to leisurely sway. Everything was out of her control, but it was inexplicably safe and secure. The thought appeared in the movie theater. Before it could completely take shape, Cat Eyes let out a "whoa" from the side. There really is one. The background of the image of the blue sky and white clouds suddenly had the color of blood spread out. Moreover, it appeared at the center of the mist fortress that Lo spoke of. The newly emerged elements possessed a very strong sense of space. It was as if they had entered another world through a hole in the depths of the mist. There were towering rocks and flowing bloody light. Below it was a hot lake of lava, and above it floated turbid clouds and lightning. It was malevolent and terrifying. It was similar to the demonic realm's ghost prison. Within the movie theater, one could even hear the muffled sounds of lava boiling and flowing. Lee's mind finally became confused. She couldn't distinguish the relationship between the structure of the Blood Soul Temple in the Clear Abyss district and the image of the Blood Soul Temple in front of her. She subconsciously muttered to herself, "The Blood Soul Temple?" Before Cat Eyes and Snake Tongue could react to this, a living creature with wings suddenly emerged from the chaotic cluster of clouds. It was accompanied by a long and hoarse cry as it charged out. Its shape was similar to a prehistoric pterosaur. It had a sharp beak, a thin neck, long wings, and a thick tail. Its entire body was featherless and covered in scales. The most astonishing thing was that these things were actually in groups. When the leader appeared, a dark mass of people followed behind, stacking upon each other. Amidst the clamorous cries, they spat out a large amount of acid. It was like a violent gale and a sudden shower of rain that rolled down. The cloud was wrapped in acid rain. Suddenly, lightning flashed and thunder roared. Amidst the crackling sounds of exploding lightning, a group of beetles resembling a black cloud appeared. It was unknown how many thousands or tens of thousands of them buzzed out. What followed was an absurd amount of meteors that were thrown down. However, halfway through, one could see that each and every one of them had their limbs bunched up. It was difficult to distinguish their stone humanoid forms as they were thrown down towards the bottomless layer of clouds, and this was just the beginning. In a few breaths of time, there were countless waves of marvelous creatures that appeared from within the cluster of clouds and lightning. Behind them, there were even man-made flying machines and large mechas rushing out. Occasionally, there would be a few illusory human figures whose faces could not be seen clearly. They either spiraled in the air, dropped down at high speeds, or attacked each other. They occupied the entire screen of the image. The three female ability users in the movie theater seemed to be watching an absurd fantasy war film. It also seemed as if they had fallen into some absurd dreamland. A more rational way of looking at it would be like someone had taken multiple shots and spliced them together into a video work. At the same time, it was presented in this large background. Not to mention the effects of the editing, just the logic of the shots was enough to make one feel despair. If one had to find a common point from this mess of images, then it would probably be this: every image of an existence manifested an extraordinary power. Moreover, every power seemed to be rather out of the ordinary. This was especially true for the few illusory human figures that pierced out from the back. Most of them were only wrapped in a single layer of armor. Some of them even wore unlined clothing and were unarmed. Yet, every movement they made pierced through the sky and collapsed the clouds. They roared through the wind and thunder. It was as if they were gods manifesting themselves. It should be said that everyone was an extraordinary. The image of Cat Eyes in the movie theater very naturally assumed a posture of supporting her chin with her legs crossed. Your Blood Soul Temple is actually a summoning class? That's not funny. Not to mention the two conversing, Snake Tongue was watching seriously to the side. She was dizzy from watching, but at the same time, she had some strange sensations. She seemed to be able to hear some sort of noise amidst the unbearably chaotic background noise of the fantasy war film. It was extremely muffled and rather chaotic. Most importantly, she was unable to find a corresponding scene in the movie playing. She practically believed it to be a tinnitus illusion. But where did the tinnitus come from within the framework of Luo Nan's mental domain? Once the sensation was born, it was like maggots attached to the bones. It lingered and refused to disperse. Did you hear anything? Cat Eyes suddenly changed the topic. Snake Tongue could feel that the telepathic connection between the three of them still existed. Some strong thoughts would be sensed by the other two even earlier than the modified thoughts of communication. The three of them still needed some time to get used to this sort of communication method. It was easier for them to reach a common understanding, realize sharing, and even form a resonance. Correspondingly, the feeling naturally multiplied. There was no more conversation after that, but the extra noise that was like maggots attached to the bones grew clearer. Unknowingly, the thoughts of the three sunk downwards. In this bizarre movie theater, it was tantamount to listening attentively. Buzz buzz buzz. Boom boom. The noise was mixed with director Luo Nan's special visual effects. There seemed to be a certain rhythm to it. It was quite familiar. But probably because they were quite nervous, the three of them had a mental barrier. They were unable to distinguish it for a time. In the end, it was Cat Eyes who laughed in spite of herself. She eased the atmosphere. The viewing environment of this movie theater opened by the boss isn't too good. Huh. These words were like a cold blade that had been unsealed. It streaked across the hearts of the three. There's someone else? It was very normal for there to be other people in the movie theater. But the radiance on the large screen suddenly turned intense, causing the luminosity of the entire movie theater to rise by a notch. It also opened up their field of view. And so, the three of them had a momentary feeling of confusion. They were already close to getting used to the movie theater. It was a bit inappropriate. They really were in a sealed space, and they really were watching a video. But this space was much larger than the movie theater. It was like an enormous stadium. It was stuffed to the brim. The problem was that aside from the three of them, the other people were no longer silhouettes or silhouettes. Instead, they were densely packed with turbid smoke. The smoke itself didn't seem to flow, but it really did exist. And in the deepest depths of the smoke, there seemed to be gloomy flames. They were one after another, and their boundaries could not be seen. They were like swaying soul fire. Cat Eyes, Snake Tongue, and Enle had a mental interaction once more. Their blood ran cold. Inside the movie theater. Even if it was a movie theater, it wasn't just the three of them. There were other people. There were many, many people. They existed in an even more chaotic and fuzzy form. The additional noise seemed to be the whispers and discussions of these people. In addition, there was also clatter clatter clatter. It was unknown when, but the fine sound of trembling chains had emerged from within the turbid mist soulfire. It rang in their ears, and it was also boundlessly far away. If one were to carefully experience it, it would seem as though the chains were probing out from the depths of their souls. One end was locked, and the other end was connected. They were connected to a boundless and enormous net of chains. Every person within the movie theater, regardless of whether they were complete or incomplete, was a tiny node in this enormous net. This. Cat Eyes clearly recalled the nightmare from a few days ago. This memory was conveniently shared with the other two, and the corresponding emotions were transmitted back. Her willpower was trembling unconsciously. The structure before her eyes was becoming more and more different from the movie theater. It was to the point that a more suitable name was given: an altar. An enormous altar. An innumerable number of believers surrounded the surroundings, attentively watching the chaotic image in the center, or perhaps it could be called a miracle. They also offered their souls to the miracle. The power of the sacrifice transformed into invisible flames that resonated with the miracle on the altar. It provided energy and also refined the images, allowing the gaps to be mended and naturally transition until they became one. Within the space of the altar, there were millions and millions of souls. The chains connected, sacrificed, and smelted, forming a complete closed loop. This was no longer a movie. The vivid and lifelike images and inconceivable scenes were merely embroidery that floated on the outer layer of true power. As the power trembled, it seemed to exist in the form of a living being. As for what the deeper nature of this power was, just below the trembling embroidery, a ferocious shadow suddenly appeared. Although it was only half a body, one could already see the ugly appearance of a human face, an arachnid body, and 6 different colored pupils. The instant this demonic shadow appeared, the surroundings of the entire altar seemed to be burning with a layer of raging flames. The flames scorched the mind and scattered fear. It was as if all the destructive power within the chaotic image in the center was projected onto the plane of reality. But it was only as if. The malevolent demonic shadow arched its body halfway out when a foot stomped heavily on its back. A complete and familiar silhouette of a human stepped on the arachnid demonic shadow, appearing within the vision of the consciousness of the 3 clear-headed people. Luo Nan. The embroidery of true power trembled even more violently. It was thanks to them that the body of power, which was originally invisible and unfathomable, had vaguely transformed into an enormous cloak. It encircled Luo Nan's body, conforming to the marvelous rhythm of Luo Nan's existence as it trembled and tumbled. They could only see that Luo Nan was the core of the cloak, but they could not see where it extended to. Luo Nan created all of this. He dominated all of this. He obtained all of this. He was at the center of the cloak. He was at the center of the altar. He was at the center of the entire system. He controlled and bore the weight of all of this. Therefore, he naturally became the focal point of everything. He did not look in any direction. He was like a statue of a god worshipped in a temple, watching over everyone. Cat Eyes could feel that the other 2 had already assimilated into the scene. Although they had entered later, they were more receptive to this scene than she was. Perhaps this was how the Luo Nan in their hearts should be. But she thought about their first meeting a few months ago. She thought about their contact in reality and compared it to the image before her eyes. She subconsciously felt an even more intense tremble. This bit of emotional reaction was soon drowned in that damned resonance. Perhaps it was precisely because of this resonance that the rhythm of the noise that made one's scalp go numb became even more distinct. In the end, it unified into some sort of hymn. Millions and millions of people chanted in unison. Cat Eyes chanted along, but the contents of her chant were far too vague. She chanted a bit in a muddled daze. She vaguely felt that the enormous cloak was a bit closer to her. It fluttered and brushed past her face. It flooded her mind, covering her in an unknown layer. All of the distractions completely receded at this moment. Only the words of praise emerged from the bottom of her heart. They curled up like smoke as they rose unhurriedly. My heart is a prison, my heart is a furnace, my heart is a mirror, my heart is a nation. Chapter 863. Snake Tongue sank into a dream that was hard to wake up from. She was originally at the side of the enormous altar in the movie theater, resonating with the countless believers and praising the inconceivable Lord. Her soul nearly melted into it. But she didn't know when it started, but she had already entered an even more absurd space. There was no process or transition, no sufficiently convincing logic. It truly was like a dream. But this dreamland was becoming more and more real. Snake Tongue seemed to have arrived at a battlefield filled with endless cannon fire. That's right, it was a battlefield. The logic of the dream was rapidly becoming complete, giving her an incomparably deep and conclusive impression. She had sunk into the center of the chaotic war zone. She was surrounded by impregnable fortresses. Rumbling war machines could be seen everywhere. Countless soldiers, wearing exoskeleton armors, operated fighter aircrafts, shuttles, and large-scale mechas. They were currently engaged in a selfless slaughter. As for their enemies, they were extraordinary life forms similar to mutants. Many of them were once elements of the movie theater in front of her. There were also some that were simply the giant bloody apes flying back and forth in the cloud world. The battle between the two sides was so intense that Snake Tongue couldn't avoid being drawn in. She couldn't even tell who was friend and who was foe. She was only driven by some unknown power. She confronted every threatening target that appeared in her surroundings and was killed. It was that simple. Snake Tongue's strength was too mediocre in this battlefield. The most frightening thing was that she couldn't keep up with the rhythm of the war. As a cursemancer, she wasn't used to this kind of chaotic, intense, and tornado-like killing situation. It was as if she had sunk into an enormous meat grinder. The gaps she could survive through were narrow and cramped. The slightest bit of carelessness would cause her to be crushed into meat paste. After the pain of death passed, she would be reborn in a different location on the same battlefield and once again sink into an endless battle. At first, Snake Tongue was at a loss. What was going on? What kind of logic was this? But later on, she was killed so many times that she didn't have any room to ponder. This was because even if it was a dream, the pain she felt at the moment of death was so real that it made one shiver. Beheading, piercing the heart, chopping the waist, dismembering the corpse, incinerating it, corroding it. In the meat grinder of the battlefield, the death that Snake Tongue had once abandoned her dignity and self to avoid came in different forms. There was only the strong and the weak. There was no way to avoid it. Even though the endless rebirths had partly reduced the horror between life and death, the instincts of life still made her try her best to avoid such an ending. She fought with other people and defeated the enemy, but it would not take long before she was killed again and had to experience a new way of death. Death might be like a dream, but the pain was accumulating. Perhaps when things reached an extreme, they would turn in the opposite direction. When people were too numb, they would eventually gain calmness. She didn't know how many times she'd died, but in a split second, Snake Tongue suddenly had an epiphany. At that time, when she was in a state of chaos between life and death, a beam of light pierced through her and made her whole body transparent. She shivered subconsciously. Then, what she sensed was not only the noisy and bloody battlefield, but also a pair of cold and penetrating eyes. The eye was embedded in a corner of this dreamscape. It could even be said that the entire dreamscape was the embodiment of the eye. That's right. The eyes were coldly watching her struggle for her life, displaying everything she had learned and revealing every trump card she had. They were also watching how much her flesh and skin could withstand, and how she would collapse and decay. Just like that, Snake Tongue was seen through from inside out. Snake Tongue was no longer confused. It was Luo Nan. She didn't know when it started, but all the inconceivable things she encountered were inextricably linked to Luo Nan. And as long as she had this central axis, all logic would be straightened out. Snake Tongue suddenly understood her current role. A test subject tied to the table. She didn't have any strength to fight back. She could only watch as the cold boy reached over and cut open her clothes, skin, and all her barriers and defenses. The cruel battlefield was the operating table. Luo Nan used this method to strip her, dismember her, and dissect her. He took apart every inch of her flesh, every organ, every bone, and every nerve. He tested the process of them twisting, deforming, and falling apart under different conditions. Then he reassembled and reassembled them. He even smeared oil and waxed them. He preserved and maintained them. He waited for them to recover to their original state before throwing them into a new round of experiments. This was how Snake Tongue felt. She struggled and fought within this absurd dreamland. But in the more realistic dimension, she just let Luo Nan do as he pleased. She didn't have the strength to fight back. Luo Nan used this method to understand the limits of her fleshly body, the limits of her mind, and some details that even she herself didn't know about. The sudden realization was unable to alleviate any of the pain. Instead, it made her feel even more despair because of the clarity. Snake Tongue didn't know how long this experience would last. She was going to collapse. She was really going to collapse. Even if it was a nightmare, even if she clearly knew it was a nightmare, thousands of reincarnations had already crushed the barrier of her will. Snake Tongue wanted to beg Luo Nan, but no matter how she struggled, whether it was bitter tears or mournful moans, it was all meaningless. Her cries and screams were unable to reach Luo Nan at all. In this moment, she understood the distance between an ant and a god more than any other time. In a certain sense, this made her feel even more despair than the endless pain. Later on, Snake Tongue even began to envy the soulfires that once sat side by side with her under the altar, buzzing in praise. She would rather become a chaotic and ignorant soul. She didn't have any extravagant desires, nor did she pursue the meaning of herself. She just attached herself to Luo Nan's system. She only wished to be able to escape this cruel torture and the despairing reincarnation. This thought was like a highly corrosive poison. It instantly spread, causing her mind, which was already riddled with holes, to practically lose all activity. If that was the case, if she could escape reincarnation like that, then Snake Tongue didn't mind sinking into that state at all, as long as it was the ultimate release. Northmont, Northmont. The sudden call, as well as the intense vibrations, suddenly attacked, shaking the entire dream space. It felt very violent. Snake Tongue wasn't angry at all. On the contrary, her mind was gushing with positive emotions. This was the feedback she had been begging for a long time. Finally, someone responded to her, called out to her, treated her as a normal person, a life on the same level. This scene was like someone tossing a lifeline to her when she was about to drown in deep water without a speck of light. No matter who it was, Snake Tongue would do her utmost to reach out and grab it, struggling upwards. A second later, the barrier between dreamland and reality shattered with a rumble. Snake Tongue suddenly opened her eyes. What entered her eyes was dusky darkness, followed by a chaotic burst of colorful light. Countless complex remains of the barrier were mixed within. The elements of reality and unreality were mixed together, forming an inexplicable flood of information. It crushed through the depths of her brain and heart. After no less than 5 seconds, Snake Tongue found her own logic. She was finally able to clearly distinguish the blurry silhouette of Lu in front of her. In the next 3 to 5 seconds, she could feel the touch of the tatami beneath her, the structure of the wall behind her, and the sound of flowing water in the outer layer. Numerous layers of innumerable details gradually formed an incomparably solid existence in her mind and around her body. The familiar yet unfamiliar world of reality was like a sturdy escape pod. It firmly protected Snake Tongue inside, isolating her from everything in her dream. It was only at this time that Snake Tongue was able to clearly feel the situation of her body. She was completely drenched, both inside and out. Sweat soaked through her clothes, and the tatami beneath her was also soaked. She was already showing slight signs of dehydration. In the darkness, she didn't even know if she was bleeding or sweating. Her complexion was probably terrible. Otherwise, Lu, who had a normal relationship with her, wouldn't reveal such a worried expression. "Are you alright?" "You." Snake Tongue originally wanted to say, "Don't tell me you didn't have that experience." Just as this thought arose, she suddenly stared blankly. What had she just experienced? Snake Tongue's memories abruptly turned chaotic. A certain dreamlike memory that caused her to feel fear and despair blurred at an astonishing speed. No matter how she tried to trace it back, she could only recall a rough layout at most. In her dream, there seemed to be a fortress where soldiers were stationed, a cloud that swallowed and spat out mutants, and a lava mountain range that was like a blood prison. They existed together, but they also conflicted with each other. Together, they constructed a chaotic world. As for herself, she seemed to be trapped inside. She had experienced a past she couldn't bear to recall. As for the concrete details of the process, she couldn't remember them. The injury that might have existed was buried deep within that chaotic dreamland world. It also sunk into the depths of her heart. No matter how she pondered over it, it was difficult for it to stir up great waves. The only thing she could be sure of was this: what had she really experienced? Oh, there was also that Lu probably didn't have such an experience. Jealousy involuntarily rose in Snake Tongue's heart. Yet, she still had to thank Enlo for waking her up from that mysterious and terrifying nightmare. Her chaotic and complicated thoughts tangled together, causing her to be sluggish and dazed for a time. Of course, Enlo could see that Snake Tongue's current state was terrible. That was rather strange. Enlo put herself in Snake Tongue's shoes. Although the things she had experienced were shocking, they shouldn't have caused Snake Tongue to become like this. Enli's thoughts spun in two circles. She analyzed the situation from her own experience and suddenly thought of a possibility. Beishan, could it be that you were disrespectful to Mr. in that sort of situation? Disrespectful? Snake Tongue subconsciously shivered. She lost control of herself and shook her head. She wanted to speak to defend herself, but she was powerless to speak. This made Enlo even more certain of her judgment. Enlo had worked in secret orders all year round. She had seen quite a few similar things. It had only been a dozen or so days since Snake Tongue had become Luo Nan's disciple. Even though Luo Nan had displayed deference and obedience that left her flabbergasted, it was unknown if she was unwilling in her heart. As a believer, disrespectful thoughts were ingrained in their hearts. It was fine normally, but if they were to reveal such thoughts during the state of the Great Sacrifice, even for a sect as idealistic as the Blood Flame Order, the backlash they had to endure was rather terrifying. Needless to say, Luo Nan had already displayed the clear image of a god. As the saying goes, the gods of heaven and earth are clearly visible. They cannot be slandered. Snake Tongue was extremely intelligent. How could she have made a mistake in this matter? Looking at Snake Tongue's current situation, especially her gaze, she was in a weak and sensitive state. She had avoided the extremes of numbness and despair. She might not be in too much pain, but fear was deeply rooted in her heart. She was like a dark fire in an underground coal seam. It was silent, but it couldn't be extinguished. It was unknown how it would burn for hundreds or thousands of years. She had probably been beaten quite ruthlessly. Enlo was inexplicably proud of herself. She felt that she should say a few words of comfort and comfort. The change in her mind was quite subtle. Her wristband vibrated at this time. She looked at the caller ID. It was Alpine Rong 3. Alpine Rong 3 had been maintaining a frequency of contact with Enlo every 2 or 3 days for the sake of discussing business. It wasn't a big deal. However, it was hard to avoid people thinking a bit more under these circumstances. Enlo put aside the matter of Snake Tongue for now. She pondered for a few seconds, and after another vibration, she connected the call. Alpine Rong 3's gentle voice, which was quite different from his appearance, rang out. Mrs. En, good day. Hello, Mr. Alpine. Is there something you need? There is indeed something. Sure enough, Alpine Rong 3 called at this time to talk about the matter of registration. With the Amaterasu order behind the scenes, the bureaucratic system of Osaka City was mobilized. The so-called registration could really be played around with. For a business entity like the Great Marsh Order that spanned the secular world and the inner world, there were many items to be filled out for registration. Not to mention the clergy of their own shrine, the employees of the association, and those with an inner world background, they had to send over a name list. Even people with recent business cooperation, as long as they were ability users, had to write a brief so that they could mutually verify. If they found it troublesome and didn't report or omitted to report, well, they might violate the relevant public security regulations. At that time, even if they had already signed a cooperation agreement, they might not be able to pass the Peace Trade Council or even the Osaka City government's investigation. Any business could be ruined. Most importantly, they would definitely offend the Amaterasu order. The registration had to be done. Alpine Rong 3 had called to give his greetings before the registration was submitted. He also wanted to see if there were any inconveniences on Enli's side so that they could both be aware of each other. Enli couldn't tell them if there were any inconveniences. She could only calmly express her understanding. She didn't forget to worry for Alpine Rong 3. It's just that there are quite a few people in the processing plant. Do they all have to be registered? Alpine Rome 3 sighed a few times. A large portion of the workers employed in the factory come from the tribes of the wilderness. Many of them are infected by deformities. According to the requirements, they all have to be registered. Each and every one of them has a complicated background. It's very difficult to count them. Normally, this sort of thing would be done with everyone's eyes closed. Today, it won't be so easy to pass. After sighing and chatting idly for a while, both sides ended the call. Inlu immediately turned to look at Snake Tongue. Not too good. It sounds like Old Hand and the Hengduan tribe have run into some trouble. Alpine Rome 3 could have warned them, hinted at them, or apologized in advance. In short, they had definitely run into some trouble that was difficult to resolve. After a few minutes of buffering, Snake Tongue's spirit was a bit better. Although it was still hard to conceal her weakness, her brain could finally spin. Next door, that operation team. They've always been very interested in Old Hand and the others. As she was analyzing, Yin Li's wristband vibrated again. This time, it was an unfamiliar number. Through AI matching, it showed that it was the office number of the Ability User Association's Saka City branch. Yin Li furrowed her brows. She connected the call again, but this time, she asked despite knowing the answer. Who is this? A woman's voice rang out from the other side. There were no fluctuations in emotion. She spoke in a businesslike manner. The Blood Flame Order's Deputy First Ablatum, Madame Inlo. This is the External Relations Office of the Ability User Association's Saka City branch. Oh, hello. We have here the inspection report of your entry and the signed security agreement. According to the relevant clauses, we are here to notify you of a special event. Yin Li's gaze met Snake Tongue's. She continued to play dumb. What's the matter? May I ask if you already know of the notice issued by the Saka City branch? I'm not too clear. Then please take a look at the highlighted topic on the Ability User Association's internal forum. The title is, Please follow the requirements of the notice and report as soon as possible the members of your esteemed order in Saka City, their location, and other relevant matters. All information please be submitted through the designated channels before 1:30 p.m. in the afternoon. 1:30 p.m. in the afternoon? Our order also has property in Saka City. We also have quite a few ability users. It's not easy to calculate. Isn't the time a bit tight? There's no room for discussion. If Madame Inla still doesn't understand the gravity of the situation, then please take a look at the relevant notice and immediately begin the relevant work. Huh? There seemed to be someone speaking on the other side. It paused for a few seconds before suddenly changing to a different person. It was clearly a man's voice. His throat was rough, as if he always had phlegm stuck in his throat, ready to spit out at any time. Deputy First Ablatamine? The other side asked despite knowing the answer. It felt like she was an extremely powerful person. Inlu said suspiciously, You are. The administrative department and SA have sufficient evidence to prove that a portion of the restricted personnel of the peaceful trade market are suspected of making false registrations in this matter. These people maintain close contact with you. In order to clear the suspicion of your order, please immediately submit the relevant information. Inlu furrowed her brows. I just said that the statistics are very difficult. The other side responded firmly, If there are difficulties, then overcome them. I'll give you an hour to submit all the information before 11 a.m., or else bear the consequences. Inlu was so angry that she laughed. This group of people from the Saka City branch were all cowards in front of the Amaterasu order. How dare they put on such a show at this time? The tone on the other side became even more ruthless. Listen up, Saka City is not the Blood Flame Order's territory, and the peaceful trade market is even more so. You can do business if you want, but if you mix in sand, I'll make you regret stepping on this land. This didn't sound like the tone of the Saka City branch. It sounded more like a violent person. Inlu stopped laughing. Who are you? A judge to confirm your crimes and hand them over to the flames of heaven to carry out the holy judgment. The other side directly cut off the communication. Who was this inexplicable fellow? Enle had a deep impression of that person's voice and domineering attitude. However, what left the deepest impression was still the words, flames of heaven. He's definitely not a member of the Saka City branch. He should be someone from the Amaterasu order. That's not the case. Snake Tongue said in a low voice from the corner. From his tone, he should be an important figure in the Heaven faction. He's most likely the leader, Go to Masayoshi. Go to Masayoshi. Upon receiving Snake Tongue's reminder, a certain piece of information hidden deep in the corner of Enle's memory was activated. Should it be said that it reverberated like thunder? Everyone knew that the true god and pope of the Amaterasu order were admittedly famous extraordinary experts under the heavens. They also had a group of top-notch talents under them, such as Fatty Dragon, one of the 3 heroes of the secret order. But compared to the other 2 great orders, and even the majority of the famous secret orders in the world, the Amaterasu order's organizational structure and efficiency were really mediocre. Even in Saka City, the Amaterasu order didn't penetrate too deeply into the various industries of Saka City. They only cast the ominous name of the extraordinary as a shadow in the hearts of others and spread it when necessary. Under these circumstances, the large and small orders in Saka City possessed the conditions to grow unrestrainedly. This resulted in Saka City being known as the City of 10,000 Gods. Of course, everyone now knew that this was nothing more than the leek planting techniques of the true god and pope. After one crop was cut, another crop would grow. However, it was an indisputable fact that their organization was weak. There were some matters that one couldn't just pay attention to the deterrence of the higher-ups. No matter how useful the true god and pope's names were, they couldn't be used as calling cards under normal circumstances, right? It was precisely under these circumstances that organizations like the Heaven faction came into being. There were many such organizations on the periphery of the Amaterasu order. The composition of their members was complicated. Many of them were nomads from the wilderness or wanted criminals. They had a close relationship with the Amaterasu order, but on the surface, they didn't have any official relations. They were more like enthusiastic citizens, and so on. The Amaterasu order wouldn't acknowledge everything they did. Sometimes, they would even beat them down. However, as long as one lived in Saka City for a long time and mingled in the inner world circles, they would understand the twists and turns involved. These XX groups, XX groups, XX groups, and so on were the hired thugs raised by the Amaterasu order. They didn't even need to give them any realistic benefits or money. As long as they lent them the tiger skin of the Amaterasu order and provided a few key people with the extraordinary power of the Fuso tree great divine treasure, as well as the true meaning of cultivation, there would naturally be countless ability users who would pounce on them like flies chasing after a smell. To be able to stand out in this group of organizations, Go to Masayoshi's Heaven faction naturally had its own extraordinary aspects. Snake Tongue had a rather good understanding of this person. Go to Masayoshi is the Saka City branch's Deputy Secretary General and a director of the Equal Trade Association. It's said that he also has a position in the LRF. Enle said curiously, he doesn't seem like someone who's smooth and slick. Of course, he's more like a mad dog that can't be provoked. Currently, the leash is in the hands of the Amaterasu order. Without a doubt, this was a vicious dog raised by the Amaterasu order. It was a knife in the hands of the Pope and the true gods, the kind that could be thrown away at any time. Even Go to Masayoshi himself should understand this point. However, this was a guy who was deeply addicted to gambling. He used the time in the hands of the Pope and the true gods to put on enough tiger skin for himself. He also possessed the corresponding strength and status. It was this kind of guy. Once he set his mouth, he wouldn't let go until he tore his target to shreds. This kind of organization, this kind of guy, was very compatible with the current environment. They turned the absolute superiority of the Amaterasu order in Saka City into a substantial threat that was pressed against everyone's throat. Enle could almost hear that snoring sound coming from the throat of the vicious dog. She already had a headache before they even started fighting. In such a short period of time, Inlo also couldn't think of a suitable solution. At this time, an internal communication call came in. It was from Captain Kurwashi on the front deck. As Lee's most capable subordinate in Saka City, this senior retired officer reported with some worry, the authority of the yacht has been cut off. If we can't get the follow-up permission from SA, the yacht can't even drive out of the passenger terminal. As an ability user, no one expected to rely on a yacht to do anything. However, this was undoubtedly a warning, and a very impolite one at that. Lee's face sank. She seriously thought for a few minutes. Finally, she decided to call Ryoso Okuhira again to understand the situation. In fact, she wanted to call the veteran directly. However, the status of the two sides was still a bit unequal. No matter what happened to the veteran, if they were caught talking to each other, it would be hard to avoid suspicion that they paid more attention to the veteran, although this was the truth. Inla didn't want to provide Goto Masayoshi with a bargaining chip to threaten him. The call to Ryoso Okuhira didn't go through immediately. However, 30 seconds later, the other side sent back a video call request. Inla felt a bit strange. However, she still chose to accept it. Of course, before that, she didn't forget to turn on the lights in the living room. Mr. Okuhira. Just now, Inla forcefully swallowed back the words she wanted to say. Because in the projection screen, not only did the ugly but familiar face of Ryoso Okuhira appear, there was also a man who was almost 2 times thinner. His skin was deathly pale, like a skeleton. This guy who looked like a drug addict maintained a rather intimate distance from Ryoso Okuhira. He grinned and said, "Ms. Inlu, right? Unfortunately, I caught evidence again. You secretly colluded with your business partner to confess. Don't explain. I gave you an hour. In the end, you did these meaningless things. This is disrespect to me." She didn't need to look at this face. Just by listening to the greasy throat that seemed to be filled with phlegm, Inla knew who the person in front of her was. The mad dog with many layers of tiger skin, Goto Masayoshi. The real contact, Ryoso Okuhira, expressionlessly stood at the side. He didn't give Inla any hint. Or, it could be said that his iron-like face was the most obvious hint. Goto Masayoshi grinned a bit more. "Ms. Inlo, you really are a beauty. This makes my mood a lot better. I don't mean to be disrespectful. I'm just stating the truth. Otherwise, I wouldn't even say a word more. The inspection of the factory is about to be over. After solving the matter of the day's processing factory, I will continue to communicate with you. I hope that at that time, you can give me the name list of the relevant personnel. Otherwise, I will have another explanation." Inla coldly stared at Goto Masayoshi. She had already labeled him as a scum of society in her heart. However, this guy's background was really strong. Speaking up to here, Goto Masayoshi suddenly turned his face and looked outside the projection screen. "That lady, please wait." Ryoso Okuhira spoke for the first time. "Mr. Goto, this is the technical director of our factory." Chapter 864. The veteran held a Nyogue's rib and placed it in front of him, observing the curve of the bone after deep processing. The laser ruler of the auxiliary instrument drew one node after another on the surface of the pale yellow bone, and marked the errors down to the micron. As usual, he patrolled the workshop and acted as a quality inspector, spot-checking at any time. His standards were strict, almost harsh. "This one is useless." Since it was useless, the veteran was no longer careful. He held the end of the Nyogue's rib with one hand and felt that it was quite comfortable. He exerted strength in his wrist and used the rib as a pointer, whipping the workbench. "Last night, because of your crude skills, I almost lost my face in front of Mr. Mo. His design, his process, all he needs is your skills. If you can't even do this well, even if you have the face to accept work, I don't have the face to send myself there." Around him, the workshop workers were relatively stable. Most of them kept their mouths shut and kept quiet. No one said anything. However, the overall environment of the workshop was still relatively noisy. At this time, at least 5 times the normal number of people were arranged in the assembly workshop. More than half of the 100-strong laborers of the Hengduan's 7 divisions were stuffed here. The other half were next door. As for the remaining old, weak, women, and children, they had another place to settle. In short, it was separated from both sides, giving people more room for imagination, but also breeding more uneasiness. They couldn't help but worry. The current situation was almost exactly the same as the so-called return of the vagrants, and then being packed up and sent to Ban City. Their fate was still in the hands of others, and they didn't even know whether they would live or die in the future. In the past 10 years, they had suffered 2 similar incidents in a row. Anyone's mentality would collapse. But the more it was like this, the more the veteran had to hold on. He was the spiritual leader of this group of people. Anyone could panic, but he couldn't. He couldn't let everyone waste their energy in the quagmire of negative emotions. Therefore, he secretly clenched his teeth and put up a front. He put on a posture of not panicking in the face of danger, and everything was under control. He worked hard to let the younger generation around him come into contact with more familiar scenes and avoid the imagination combination of negative emotions. At present, the effect was limited, but he still had to bite the bullet and do it. He reprimanded his apprentices with vigor. Everyone in this workshop, go back to your workstations. Those who are not involved, move aside. Today, no matter what, 20 sets of rough materials must be delivered to me. You can't even do this kind of rough work. Why should they praise you? Perhaps it was because his words had given them some room for imagination. Someone asked, "Teacher, that Mr. Mo? Can you help us deal with this?" Old Hand's eyes widened. What is it? What business do we have? A group of people has already come to this point. What more do you want to do? As he spoke, he unceremoniously whipped his little disciple's shoulder with the rib whip, causing the young man's neck to twist and cry out in pain. The veteran maintained his vigorous voice and pointed at the stupid disciple who had rashly stuck out his head and scolded, "We, a bunch of people, have traveled from the Hengduan Mountains to this damned place. We have been exiled for more than 3,000 miles, haven't we? Did the Star Alliance Committee give a reason? No. No reason is the biggest reason. With this reason, any crime is no longer a reason. As long as the momentum was strong enough, even if the logic was twisted, it would still have the effect of stimulating the brain." The more that the veteran spoke, the more confident he became. As long as you don't kill people, commit arson, rob, control your lower body, and don't do those outrageous things, what are you afraid of some groundless crime? Our identity is just a stick in the hands of others, helping to beat the gongs and drums to create momentum. We just need to be stained with mud and bear some crime. We don't need to worry about lice, so what the hell is there to be afraid of? Teacher is right, stop hitting, stop hitting. The talkative disciple's neck was about to twist, but his pleas for mercy were much louder. Old Hand knew when to stop. In fact, he knew very well that these words were extreme and biased, but it was what the group of vagrant children around him were most willing to listen to. This group of young people had already gotten used to using similar methods to hypnotize and numb themselves. They were used to lying at the bottom of the sinkhole and looking up. They had already fallen to this point, so they were not afraid of falling even more. On the contrary, as long as they climbed up a little bit, it would be a great progress. The words were old-fashioned. As long as it worked, the stagnant air in the workshop finally flowed again. The people in the workshop began to move to their respective workstations, while the others stood on both sides against the walls. Seeing this situation, the veteran secretly breathed a sigh of relief. But before he could completely exhale, the side door leading to the observation passage opened, and someone staggered in. It seemed that he had been pushed, and the door behind him immediately closed. Everyone in the workshop looked in that direction. The person who was pushed in was wearing a light blue shirt and jeans, with small white shoes on her feet. She had short hair and a round face, and was dressed in plain clothes. At first glance, she looked quite scholarly, but her age was a little unclear. At this time, she was still quite calm. She just slightly tidied her collar and smiled at the dozens of people in the workshop. In her usual restraint, there was also some bitterness. Then many people shouted at the same time. Director Jiang. Jiang Zhong, why are you here? You're the one who caused all this. You're also locked in here? There were only dozens of people, but they had two different tones when they opened their mouths. Some were concerned, some were sarcastic, especially when they heard the different tones of the people next to them. They even glared at each other. The atmosphere in the entire workshop was no longer stagnant, but it was more chaotic than before. Why are you so noisy? Don't you think it's embarrassing enough? The veteran forcefully swung the pointer, forcefully suppressing the crowd, and at the same time, he separated the crowd and went over there. In fact, he was a little surprised. Jiang Zhong, the technical director of the day's processing factory, the leader of Songping Laboratory, and also their closest collaborator during this period of time, appeared in front of him. Looking at his posture, it was clear that he was also locked in here. The situation was worse than they had expected. At this time, the veteran felt something. He turned his head and looked through the observation window on the outer wall of the workshop, just in time to see a few figures appear over there. Among them were Aohira and Rong San, but the most conspicuous one was that a drug addict, who had previously ordered the arrest. At this moment, the thoughts in the veteran's mind changed again and again. Finally, he temporarily changed his route and strode to the observation window. The rib pointer directly hit it, and the glass window buzzed. Aohira and Rong San, the business can't be done, and you still want to use underhanded methods? What are you planning by getting involved with this union's parasite? If it wasn't for the glass window blocking, the rib pointer would have directly hit Aohira and Rong San's face. In fact, the veteran wanted to hit the drug addict next to him. But he didn't dare, he really didn't dare. Aohira and Rong San weren't soft-hearted, but at least they were reasonable and operated the factory according to the rules. But the drug addict next to him was willing to do anything. The veteran called him the Union Worm, because he was the vice president of the Ping Trade Market Labor Union. This was the most inconspicuous title among more than 10 big and small titles. Even this didn't bring him a good reputation. The veteran also dared to call him a worm, because of his identity as a union member. His heart was a little nervous, but if he didn't do this, how could he shift the focus? Goto Masayoshi didn't have any reaction to the veteran's rebuke. His skinny face maintained a faint smile. He didn't say anything and directly turned around to leave. His temper was unbelievably good. Aohira and Rong San also left. From start to finish, his face was like black iron, frighteningly gloomy, but he didn't say anything. A rat in the gutter. The veteran spat resentfully. Of course he wasn't talking about Aohira and Rong San. He also knew that to these commoners, Goto Masayoshi wasn't a rat, but a giant crocodile. Although he was hiding in the gutter, he relied on his strong background to dig out countless benefits from the dirty water, raising his body to be fat and terrifying. At this time, the veteran actually hoped that this incident was only Aohira and Rong San's underhanded methods. That way the situation would be simpler. But this was destined to be wishful thinking. Since Jiang Zhong walked in, the veteran knew that the situation was most likely not going to be good. Thinking of Jiang Zhong, the veteran realized that the rules in the workshop that were set up with great difficulty were messed up again. A bunch of people rushed over to Jiang Zhong and asked about the situation. Due to Jiang Zhong's subtle position in this group of people, it was very easy for some excessive words to come out, and then it would become an internal argument. Is it you guys who are up to no good? What are you guys trying to do? What are you talking about? Didn't you see Director Jiang was also locked in? Master also said that it was Aohira and Rong San. I don't think it's that simple. It might be a plot to sow discord. You can hide a nest of cow ghosts in the hole of your brain. No matter who was arguing, Jiang Zhong didn't speak again. She only slightly lowered her head and wore a slightly nervous smile, not defending herself at all. Jiang Zhong was this kind of person. Although she was leading a research team and researching a sensitive project that exceeded scientific ethics, the way she usually behaved was just like how she was dressed right now. She couldn't get rid of the ivory tower scholarly aura. The veteran had communicated with her intermittently for a few years, so he thought that his eyes were not blurry and he understood. Those watching outside temporarily left. The veteran shook the rib whip again and came back to rescue Jiang Zhong. Is this how you work during working hours? The scene was a little chaotic after all. Someone even talked back, today is Sunday. Then a series of complaints exploded. Even if there are 3 shifts, I still have a day off today. I didn't brush my teeth or wash my face, and I was carried here. Today is Mother's Day. I don't know where my mother is. Fortunately, the prestige of the veteran was considerable. The people were just saying it to vent the shock brought about by the series of unforeseen events. After the old man waved his whip a few times, the crowd slowly dispersed. Those who should go back to their workstations went back to their workstations, and those who should squat in the corner squatted in the corner. Thank you, Master Shou. Jiang Zhong thanked the veteran for helping her out. The latter wanted to sigh but forcibly held it back. With a cold old face, he signaled Jiang Zhong to go to the supervision post with him. In the end, the hearts of the people were still wavering. Be it the people on the production line or the miscellaneous people in the corner, their gazes drifted along with them. The veteran suddenly turned his head back, and his fierce gaze finally forced everyone's thoughts back. When they finally reached a relatively quiet place, the veteran could finally sigh and let out the breath he had been holding in his chest. Master Shou, Jiang Zhong wanted to say something, but the veteran stretched out his hand and stopped him. All right, don't mention anything. I just wanted to come here to catch my breath. The veteran might have put on airs in front of a group of juniors, and he also forced himself to hold his breath. It was not easy for him to have a chance to take a breather. After another minute or two of silence, the veteran opened his mouth again and said in a hoarse voice, "They shouldn't have come for us, but we just had to be caught in the crossfire." Jiang Zhong lowered his head and said nothing. Regardless of whether it was the veteran or Jiang Zhong, both of them had some private matters that could not be exposed to the public. If it was possible, they did not want to be exposed under the spotlight. However, regardless of whether it was the small migrating tribe led by the veteran or Jiang Zhong, the technical director, they did not have the ability to struggle out of the whirlpool. They had no choice. What could they do? The veteran could not help but ponder, we are fish in the crossfire. Where is the city gate? Before he could figure out a reason, the small door leading to the observation passage opened again. This time, it was not the weak technical director who came in, but the ruthless, violent people of society. Shou Xiong, you hidden cultist, come and confront us. And this? Jiang Zhong, his name is strange. He is most likely an accomplice. Take him away too. Before the veteran and Jiang Zhong could react, 7 or 8 people had already rushed forward and surrounded them. They put on nylon ropes and dragged them away. The assembly workshop was in an uproar. At this moment, no one cared about discipline or workstations anymore. Dozens of young and strong laborers rushed forward, and it looked like a fight was about to break out. Not good. At this moment, the veteran's body was being pushed, but the sharp alarm in his head was not at all. This kind of scene was clearly aimed at intensifying the situation. At this moment, although the veteran's body was covered in the middle by the burly, violent people of society, his figure could not be seen, but a hoarse voice rose up, rough, 20 sets of rough. No matter what, make them today. If you can't make them, then you are not worthy of being the men of Hengduan Mountain. Such a scene, such words were extremely absurd, but it was this absurdity that made the hot-blooded young and strong men stunned. At this moment, the veteran struggled with all his might, but it was not to break free from the restraint. Instead, he exploded with brute force and forcefully brought 2 or 3 men beside him out of the door and into the observation passage. Right here, on the side of the thick wall that could not be seen from the workshop, dozens of armed people with electric batons and anti-riot guns were already ready to go. At the end of the observation passage, Okairu Rongzo and Goto Masayoshi both stood there. Okairu Rongzo, you despicable person, you dare to use a gun. The veteran's eyes were about to pop, and his throat was already hoarse from shouting, not only to the manipulator behind the scenes, but also to the hot-blooded young people in the workshop. The uproar in the workshop somewhat stagnated. At the other end of the passage, Okairu Rongzo was expressionless, but in his heart, he clearly knew who the veteran's burst of hatred was directed at. What a ruthless and experienced person. Goto Masayoshi praised at the side, then turned into the disinfection passage leading to the exit. Okairu Rongzo looked at the veteran again from afar, and followed behind. After a few steps, he finally could not help but say, Mr. Goto, you can withdraw your people. That's fine, maybe there are still people who can't think things through. It looked like Goto Masayoshi had made up his mind to explode a bomb for fun. Okairu Rongzo even wanted to bring out the boldness of the Vanguard captain back then, and smash a fist into the back of this guy's head, but in the end he still clenched his teeth and endured, and followed up, Mr. Goto, Sho is a vagrant, even if his faith is chaotic and out of line, it is still pardonable. As for Director Jiang, she is a high-level talent we hired, and usually only buries herself in research. Goto Masayoshi suddenly stopped, turned around, and wiped away the light and shadows of the passage on his face. Mr. Okairu, as far as I know, President Matsudaira has always been famous for being good at management. There is no one in Osaka who doesn't admire his way of management. But here, the daily management is really worrying, especially the human resources. Don't forget, I am the Vice President of the Labor Union, and a Director of the Labor Safety Inspectors Association. I have the responsibility, and also the obligation, to inquire about this matter with your side, and report the results of the inquiry to the relevant parties. So, I hope you can give me a satisfactory answer, and not this kind of meaningless argument. Okairu Rongzo took a deep breath. Mr. Goto, I am introducing the situation to you. Goto Masayoshi raised his hand to cut him off. I said, a hasty answer is not sincere. If you always have this kind of attitude, I can only interpret it as, you are trying to shirk responsibility. Even if Okairu Rongzo was a clay figurine, right now he was also provoked. His majestic body leaned forward. Mr. Goto, what on earth did you see? Can you interpret it as you first chose the frame, and then let me fill in something inside? Please pay attention. Compared to Okairu Rongzo, who was twice as big as him, Goto Masayoshi's expression didn't change. He only raised his hand again, and this time he extended his index and middle finger, turned his wrist, and pointed at his eyes. Mr. Okairu, you cannot trust me, but you have to trust my eyes. Goto Masayoshi's eyes were probably the most prominent part of his thin face. They were a bit bigger than normal people, especially on his face that was so thin it was out of shape, bulging and protruding. Even if he kept his eyelids half closed, the details of the movements of his eyeballs and his eye sockets could be clearly seen. Right now, the dim yellow pupils under his half-covered eyelids were turning, at first glance dim, but in the deepest depths, there was a dark red light. It was like the sunset at dusk, separating the horizon from the night sky. At some point, Okairu Rongzo actually felt a bit dizzy. He subconsciously averted his gaze, unwilling to meet it. Goto Masayoshi's voice pierced his ears. Remember, it won't make a mistake, the only one who will be wrong is you. Chapter 865. In the end, Old Hand and Jiang Zhong were taken away by Goto Yashitomo. Okuhiri Rongzo couldn't get away either. He was sitting in a car right now. Then Goto Yashitomo and his group went to the passenger terminal. Aside from sitting in his own car, there seemed to be no difference between him and Old Hand. President, I'm very sorry. Okuhiri Rongzo finally dialed the number. He was already prepared to bear the wrath of Matsudaira Yoshio. Okuhiri Rongzo believed that this was the correct judgment. This involved the current background of Osaka City. If he forcefully stood out at this time, it would only bring about a calamity, whether it was for himself or for the Great Zei Order. According to Goto Masayoshi's words, the Soul Cult has already been determined to be an illegal cult, and a veteran is an important contact for the Soul Cult in Band City. And recently, Veteran has already formed an economic relationship with Jiang Zhong, cooperating to purchase the shares of a processing factory. He believes that under the premise that we clearly have a better way to make money, discussing the purchase with Veteran is suspicious of us transferring benefits. Moreover, there are so-called upper echelons of the Blood Flame Order involved in this. The Blood Flame Order is a greater suspect in the assassination of the Soul Order in Xia City. They may also be in cahoots with the Soul Order. Therefore, he wants us to confront Mr. Mo and the others of the Blood Flame Order. He even wants us to go to a location on the lake that is suspected to be a stronghold of the Soul Order. Strangely, Matsudaira Yoshio didn't get angry. He faced the troubles of the processing plant and the encounter of his close friend Jiang Zhong with inconceivable calmness. It sounded like he was more interested in Goto Yashitomo, is that so? It seems that the clues are complete. Even if his reasoning is arbitrary, it has basically achieved a closed loop. He finally found an opportunity to binge. What does the president mean? He's coming for us. While carrying out the mission, he's filling his stomach. Matsudaira Yoshio was so calm that it seemed like he was talking about other people's business. If he's going to be used as a vicious dog, his stomach needs to be hungry. If he's going to be used as a knife, he needs to be sharpened before the battle. This way, his bite will be deeper and the knife will be more ruthless. He's starving right now. If he doesn't find food, how can he prop up his skin and bones? Aohei Rong-san could more or less understand Matsudaira Yoshio's meaning, but compared to Goto Yoshio's usual methods and behavior, other than the appearance of a drug addict, there was no connection between him and hunger and torture. Suppressing the doubts in his heart, Okurin Rong-san voiced out his greatest worry. If that's the case, the possibility of today's matter being reduced to a small matter doesn't exist? Unless he can find a fatter bone. Aohei Rong-san's heart sank. He more or less understood Matsudaira Yoshio's deduction. Due to the escape of the deity of the main priest, the Great Zei cult could be considered as a toothless tiger. However, they still had quite a considerable property in Band City. If they weren't meat, then who was? Things were awkward. If the Amaterasu cult had continued with their original plan, they might have been able to gain the reputation of having foresight. But as time went by, the Amaterasu cult seemed to have completely forgotten their big plan, and their situation in Band City became more and more difficult. During this period of time, more than one new and old force had shown malice towards them. Goto Yoshio was the biggest threat among them, and also the most evil one. It was not impossible to take over the Great Zei cult's main property in one fell swoop by the Amaterasu cult. At present, they had unknowingly walked to the edge of the cliff. Aohei Rong-san took a deep breath. President, how should we deal with it? From a practical point of view, the cult has little chance in Band City. Even at this time, Matsudaira Yoshio's tone was still calm, almost like a pure objective analyst. The foundation of the cult has been scattered, revealing a gap. There is no reason for others to hold back, and even I will make a move. Just for Goto Yoshio alone, there are still some variables. Because even if he is a vicious dog, before gnawing on a meat bone, he still has to listen to his master's words, bare his teeth. Maybe he will get a kick? Huh. While Aohei Rong-san was stunned, the speed of the car he was in slowed down. The motorcade pulled out by Goto Yoshio had already successively left the high-speed magnetic rail, entered the passenger terminal of the Ping Trade Market, and then stopped. Unable to communicate with Matsudaira Yoshio anymore, Aohei Rong-san hurriedly hung up the phone, adjusted his breathing, and opened the door to get out of the car. The car was parked by the shore of the lake. It was cloudy today, but the sunlight that shone through the gaps between the clouds still had the effect of heating up and causing dizziness. In such an environment, Aohei Rong-san felt very uncomfortable. Before him, Goto Yoshio had already gotten out of the car in front, looking at the high-class yacht berth on the pier. The pier was bustling with people coming and going, but over there, the density of the people was still 2 or 3 levels higher. The area where the yacht berth was had already become a typical scene of confrontation. On the shore, a group of people gathered. All of them were strong and well-built, dressed in black suits, and in the middle were a few people dressed in standard combat uniforms, but they did not look like good people. In the sky, there were drones buzzing. On the lake near the shore, there were 3 to 5 speedboats, roaring back and forth. Sea, land, and air attacked, and the center of focus was the yacht on the shore. As for the yacht, near the shore, more than 10 strong sailors stood in a row, their backs against the almost 10-meter-high hull, and their momentum was not inferior. This scene seemed to be rounding up some criminal, but it seemed to make sense to change the position. Aohei Rongsan, of course, knew the background of both sides. Not to mention the group of people on the shore, some of the important figures in the Heavenly Council still had a lot of opportunities to show their faces in the peaceful trade market and even in Band City. As for the yacht that was stuck in the berth, it was sold from his hands to the Blood Flame Order 2 weeks ago, in exchange for some working capital. Now, even the name on the paint on the side of the yacht had not changed. Goto Yoshio's eyelids drooped, half covering his protruding eyes, and sighed with emotion. People now are not like in the past. They all have to hit their heads and bleed before admitting to their debts. Aohei Rongsan really wanted to tell him that if people in this world were like meat and bones, then what was the meaning of the Heavenly Council? Thinking about this, Goto Yoshio understood this logic better than anyone, so he just sighed with emotion and waited for someone. Goto Yoshio? A somewhat stiff tone sounded from the side of the parking space. A dark-faced man in a standard combat suit strode over. Compared to the violent people in the distant confrontation area, he had the same sturdy physique and the same combat suit. When this man wore it, he looked quite formal, but no one knew where he came from. Goto Yoshio did not get angry because of the other party's impolite way of addressing him. Instead, the smile on his thin face became clearer. Captain Jimmy? The black-faced man smirked towards the standoff area. You did this? When I flew back, I thought we could start the war, but it turned out to be this kind of scene. The police, SCA, and even the Band City branch could all go. Why did you let these unruly guys come? No, we first need to observe. Facing this rather arrogant captain, Goto Yoshio was still neither hurried nor slow, only opening his mouth and laughing. My mission is to observe, and observation requires different situations and conditions. If both sides are law-abiding citizens, and everything is done according to the rules, what's the meaning? Oh, that's a good reason. Captain Jimmy could see that Goto Yoshio was purposely trying to intensify the situation. This was in line with his expectations, but he still made some minor corrections. He directly reached out and, without any regard for himself, grabbed Goto Yoshio's shoulder, and pushed this observer forward. What you need is to observe up close. Goto Yoshio did not resist, only the corner of his mouth twitched. Yes, if I want to upgrade, I need you guys to do it. Believe me, I can't wait. An evil dog that had not eaten its fill, a sharp knife that already couldn't wait. In the eyes of Okuni Rome 3, Goto Yoshio and this Captain Jimmy both had corresponding roles, and the relationship between them was rather subtle. There was a difference in their levels, and also differences in their functions, but fundamentally, they were both tools. There was no essential difference. Of course, even if they were to use tools, hand-eye coordination was also necessary. They still had to communicate with each other. Goto Yoshio asked again, although it might not be used, in terms of evidence, I'll let D City's side cooperate, we can also directly confront them. So obedient? People die for wealth, birds die for food. We're the best at this point. Why don't we arrange it now? It's good to communicate in advance. At this moment, Goto Yoshio's subordinates had already brought over veterans, Jiang Zhong, and other key figures of the so-called chain of evidence. He set off first. A group of 10 or so people walked along the wooden walkway by the lake towards the confrontation scene. Captain Jimmy did what he said, and while walking, he made a call. How's the preparation going? Let Cadman answer the phone. Speaking of which, the speed of changing people over there was a bit slow. Captain Jimmy didn't speak for a long time. Okuni Rome 3 finally felt that something was wrong, and turned his head to look, only to see that Captain Jimmy's face was dark, and his eyes turned back from the empty state of long-distance communication, focusing on one point. At the point of focus, which was the shore of the lake they were about to pass by, sat a person on a thick short metal pillar that was part of the fence. That person didn't have too many characteristics that could be remembered. If one were to forcefully describe it, it would probably be a particularly leisurely body language. He was wearing casual clothes, his legs were naturally spread apart, his head was raised towards the sky, and his mouth kept opening and closing, looking like he was neurotically talking to himself. Of course, it could also be that he was chatting with someone through the built-in communication device. This was a very normal scene, placed in the passenger terminal with people coming and going. There was nothing out of place. But now, in front of the yacht not far away, there was a tense confrontation atmosphere, separated by less than 30 meters. This gentleman's performance seemed somewhat out of place. Captain Jimmy's reaction didn't need to be said. The moment he saw this person, Okuni Rong III was somewhat unable to lift his feet. Go to Yoshio, who was beside him, even slowed down his steps earlier than him. The dim yellow eyeballs in the eye sockets had a clear shift, bringing along that withered head, completing a shift of attention. But no matter how they reacted, the distance between them and that person was quite close. It must be because the place where they parked was too close. Due to the close distance, they could clearly hear that person's talking to himself, Mother's Day. That's right, big sis, you're so smart, I definitely won't get involved. You're smart, but I'm not stupid, we've never done this kind of foreign festival, most likely someone leaked the information, so you came over to denounce us. Heh, you finally enjoyed a few days of peace, just obediently go into seclusion. When you come out of seclusion you'll go on a rampage and shock the world. Strange? What's strange about it? I've always talked like this. Don't worry, my position here is different from the past. Naturally there will be people to serve me. It's more comfortable than at home. Yes, I won't get carried away and purposely cause trouble for my family. If it's your turn to deal with matters, this world is more or less a step away from destruction. Just a joke, just a joke. That man used a normal speed to chat and laugh, but it made Go to Yoshio's group unconsciously slow down their steps. In the end they were still unable to maintain their natural posture. One after another they stopped, standing at a position approximately 7 to 8 steps away from the man, staring over there without looking away. About 20 seconds later, that man finally ended the chat, smiling as he hung up the communication. And also at this time, he seemed to have finally discovered the abnormal attention over here. Slightly turning his face, he also cast his gaze over, meeting face to face with this side. Aohei Rong-san had long recognized who it was, subconsciously wanting to greet him, but for some reason, the words were stuck at the tip of his tongue. It was close to noon, due to the thick layer of fish scale clouds in the sky. Even if the sunlight passed through, it was not considered hot, especially with the slightly moist air from the lake surface. Under the pressure difference between the land and water, it could be considered to be very comfortable. But at this moment, the gentle breeze that brushed against their faces had clearly turned into a layer of invisible and heavy curtain. Perhaps it was even soaked with water, as it blew over and fiercely pasted on their faces, sealing their mouths, noses, and even their orifices. Even their pores were sealed, isolating them from the inside and outside. For a moment, they actually felt as if they were suffocating, spreading from their brains and hearts. For a moment, the group of people's mouths and noses were interrupted. As for the rest, nothing happened after that, only the gentle breeze, with the water vapor on the Beishan Lake, neutralizing the heat of the noon sun, fresh and pleasant. At this time, the veteran, who was caught in the crowd, finally saw the person on the shore of the lake. For a moment, he still couldn't believe it, but that person turned his gaze, smiled slightly, and greeted him. Master Sho. In the heart of the veteran, the emotions of hesitation and surprise pushed back and forth. A voice came up to his throat, and he blurted out, "M.O. Mr. M.O. The man smiled again. "Those things I want, I hope they don't delay the work." In the factory, they are still working. The veteran clearly knew that the atmosphere at the moment was delicate and tense, like a pile of gunpowder that was constantly being compacted and could explode at any time. But his sharp temper, which had been honed in the wilderness for decades, also came out at this time. We don't have anything that's fake. It's all hammered out, so it's definitely real. That's good, I'm counting on it. Chatting with the veteran, as if there was no one else around, under the gaze of many people, Mr. Mo's gaze again turned to Jiang Zhong in the crowd, stopped for a few seconds, then lowered his head again, and beat his thigh, as if to get rid of the invisible fatigue. Also at this time, there was a sudden commotion at the confrontation scene not far away. Over there, the densely packed group of violent people suddenly opened a gap, as if someone came out. But in the end, what passed through the gap of the crowd was only an empty electric wheelchair. From the analysis of the gradually approaching noise, the electric motor of the wheelchair seemed to be not working, only God knows where it came from. Along the way, the aggressive members of the Heavenly Council looked at this thing pass by like idiots, and not a single one of them reached out to stop it. A few seconds later, the electric wheelchair that had already lost half of its functions obediently stopped next to Mr. Mo. The latter slowly stood up, leisurely moved up, and then adjusted his sitting position before letting out a long breath. His gaze moved to Goto Masayoshi's face, and met with his dim yellow pupils. The swelling of Goto Masayoshi's eyeballs was even more obvious. The pupils did not move, but there were layers of dark light, intersecting and blending in the depths. Mr. Mo blinked and praised, "Your eyes are not bad. I feel that they are even better than mine." That tone of voice was like meeting an acquaintance on the road, asking where he bought the sharp goods on him, and how much it cost. And also while speaking, in front of Mr. Mo's left eye, a monocle appeared out of thin air, floating in front of the eye socket, reflecting the sunlight, covering half of the pupil's color. You're tuning into the Romantic Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.